My girlfriend left me during my cancer treatment to get back with her ex, but now she wants to come back because he cheated on her again. When I was diagnosed with cancer last year, I thought my life couldn't possibly get any worse. I was terrified, not knowing if I'd survive or what my life would even look like from that point on. But there was one thing I believed would help me get through it all: Rachel. We'd been together for 3 years, and I thought she'd be there to help me through this and that we'd come out even stronger on the other side. At first, Rachel really put in the effort. She came with me to my doctor's appointments, held my hand when I felt weak, and made me laugh when there seemed to be nothing to smile about. There were nights when I felt too sick to even get out of bed, and she would make me soup or bring me water. I remember thinking that if I survived this, I'd spend the rest of my life making it up to her for standing by my side. But things changed faster than I expected. A few months into treatment, Rachel started to pull away. At first, it wasn't obvious. I thought she was just tired from all the effort. I figured it was hard for her too, so I didn't say much when she began spending more time with her friends or when our conversations grew shorter. Then it got worse. She started canceling plans to accompany me to treatments, saying she needed a break or couldn't bear to see me like that. I hoped it was just temporary and that she needed a few weeks to recover. But I can't lie, I was scared deep down. When she stopped asking how I was feeling, I knew something had changed. The breaking point came after one of my worst days. I'd just had a chemo session that left me completely drained, barely able to keep my eyes open. That night, Rachel came over, and instead of offering the comfort I expected, she told me she couldn't go on. I'll never forget the look on my face after that. She said, "I'm just not strong enough to watch you go through this." I thought that in a relationship, you should be there for each other when things get tough, especially after everything we'd been through. How do you respond when someone tells you they can't stand to see you hurting? I couldn't say anything. She left that night, leaving me even more shattered than the chemo session had already done. It wasn't long after she left my life that I found out where she'd gone, to get back with her ex, who I'll call Matt. I haven't mentioned his real name, but I've changed it. The same guy she once described as a red flag on legs. The guy who had cheated on her multiple times and broken her heart before we even met, which made it even harder for me to understand. I was fighting for my life, and she left me to go back to someone who'd treated her like trash. I found out through mutual friends who tried to skirt the issue, but the truth eventually came out. Rachel and Matt had moved back in together. I remember sitting there, listening to that news. My friends didn't want to tell me so I wouldn't feel even worse, but between my treatment and my daily routine, I didn't need any more news like that. Although I also felt I needed to know. Not only did they break my heart, but I was humiliated, too. There were nights I couldn't sleep, just thinking about it all. I kept asking myself if I'd done something wrong, if I'd missed a sign. But the truth is, I didn't. I was sick, that's all. And she just couldn't handle it. Over time, I stopped trying to understand it, stopped worrying about it, and started healing, at least mentally. I had no choice but to focus on getting better. I couldn't afford to waste energy being angry or resentful while I was fighting something far tougher. I have to thank my family and friends because they stepped in to take care of me and support my treatment when I had to focus on both my mental and physical health. I'll admit, I wasn't the easiest person to deal with. Feeling so weak and everything I went through didn't exactly make me the most positive person in the world, but I tried. And I'm grateful they made the effort with me. That's how you discover that people are truly worth it in your darkest moments. I'll never forget that. As time passed, I realized I was stronger than I thought. When I finished my last round of treatment and heard the word remission, I cried, not just because I'd survived cancer, but because it felt like a huge weight had been lifted off my chest. But that brings me to why I'm writing this now. I know this isn't a cancer survivor subreddit, so my story isn't just about that. A few weeks ago, I heard by chance that Matt had cheated on Rachel again. Apparently, she hadn't expected it. She thought they had worked things out. It was surreal. She left me at my lowest for someone who'd already let her down, and now she was shocked that he'd done the exact same thing again. To be honest, I didn't feel any sympathy for her. It was more like a sense of vindication, not because I wanted her to suffer, but because it confirmed what I already knew. She made her choice, and it was the worst one she could have made. I might have accepted her leaving if it was just about her not being able to take care of me, but going back to her unfaithful ex is something that should never be done. I didn't think it was my responsibility to fix the mess she made of her life. I thought that would be the end of it, that I'd hear about her drama from afar and move on with my life. But then she reached out. Last week, out of the blue, I got a message from Rachel. It had been about 2 weeks since she left Matt when I got that first message. A message that, if you ask me, reeked of desperation, like she had nowhere else to turn. It started with, "Hi, I know I don't deserve a reply, but I've been thinking about you." Then she said she was sorry, that she realized she'd made a mistake and that she left because she was scared. She said she never stopped loving me and that she wanted to talk. I didn't respond. Since that first message, she hasn't stopped trying to contact me. She's been sending me messages almost every day, apologies, memories, texts about how much she misses me. She even asked if we could grab a coffee to clear the air. I'm not stupid. I know why she's come back. She's not reaching out because she suddenly remembered that she loves me. She's doing it because she's got nowhere else to go. Matt did what Matt always does, and now she's alone. And I get it. No one wants to feel abandoned or unloved. But it's ironic, because that's exactly how I felt when she left me. Part of me wanted to respond with something that would make her feel awful, telling her to stay out of my life forever and a whole lot more. But another part of me was conflicted. I won't lie, there was a time when I loved her so much I'd do anything to win her back. But I've changed. I'm not the same person who begged her to stay that night. I survived cancer, rebuilt my life, and I'm sure I can't, and shouldn't, let her come back after everything she put me through. In the end, I sent her a simple message. I need you to leave me alone. Please respect that. She tried to argue, but I didn't reply. I don't think I'm asking too much after what happened. I deserve someone who doesn't abandon me when times get tough. Rachel may be sorry, but being sorry doesn't undo everything that happened, nor does it erase the pain. And it sure as hell doesn't prove that she wouldn't run away again. I know Matt has treated her like trash, again, which isn't a surprise to anyone, not even her. But accepting her back would be like letting myself be treated like trash. I'm not her, and she's not Matt. That dynamic between us isn't going to happen. I hope she understands, and that this allows me to close this chapter of my life. A chapter that, being tied to cancer, is all the more painful. Every memory of it, especially the bad parts, is now linked to that struggle. Update 1. Thanks to everyone who's supported me. Yes, my cancer is still in remission, but I have to get regular checkups. Still, I stay positive. Back to the topic of Rachel. After telling her I needed to be left alone, I thought that would finally close that chapter. But if you're reading this, you know I was wrong. Instead of giving me space, she ramped up her attempts to get in touch. She started contacting people in my circle, mutual friends, acquaintances, trying to find another way to reach me. At first, I didn't hear much about it because most people knew our story and respected my boundaries, so they were smart enough not to bother me with it. But then I got a message from my friend Jake with something he thought I needed to know, and I was shocked at how low things had gotten. Apparently, Rachel had told some people that she left me because I was emotionally shutting her out during my treatment, completely twisting the situation to make herself out to be the victim. That's when I really realized that Rachel didn't care about apologizing or trying to rekindle anything. She was rewriting the past to justify what she did, making sure she wouldn't come off as the bad guy. And for some reason, that hurt almost as much as when she left me. I decided to handle it without direct contact with her. I reached out to the people who'd heard her side of the story and shared the truth. Not because I was looking for sympathy or trying to win some moral victory, but because I couldn't stand the idea of her roaming around, acting like some tragic figure who had no choice but to leave me. Luckily for me, most of the people I spoke with admitted they felt she wasn't being honest. Her story didn't add up, and even some of her closest friends knew she was distorting the truth. That made me feel a bit better. I was worrying about something that wasn't even that important after all. But then something clicked in my mind. She'd been playing this game for far longer than I realized. I started reflecting on our relationship, not just the breakup, and I noticed things I hadn't seen before. Little moments when she'd subtly play the victim, like complaining to mutual friends that life wasn't fun anymore because I was always exhausted from treatment, or saying she felt trapped by the situation. At the time, I thought she was just overwhelmed, but now I could see it was part of a bigger pattern. 2 days later, I got another unexpected call, this time from a mutual friend, Paula. She'd always been closer to Rachel than to me, but we'd maintained a cordial relationship. Paula asked if I had a minute to talk, and she sounded uncomfortable. When I answered, she didn't beat around the bush. Paula told me that Rachel had been meeting up with some friends and trying to spin things so that I was the one who was controlling during our relationship. That I made her feel suffocated during my treatment. I don't even know how to describe what I felt. It wasn't sadness or even anger, it was disbelief mixed with exhaustion. I'd spent months fighting for my life, clinging to any bit of normalcy I could find while she drifted away, and now she was acting like I was the problem. After that call, I started wondering why all this bothered me so much. Why did it matter what Rachel was telling people? I thought I'd moved on, or so I believed. Then it hit me. It wasn't really about her. It was about what her version of the story represented. Her narrative made me feel like I had to defend my character, as if I wasn't just surviving cancer but also battling the twisted story she created around me. It wasn't fair, but life rarely is. I could have kept playing defense, or I could finally cut ties completely. So I made a decision. I reached out to the close friends who'd stuck with me through everything and told them I no longer wanted to talk about Rachel. If she wanted to rewrite the past, let her do it without me. I wasn't going to spend another second cleaning up the mess she'd made. To my surprise, most of the people she'd talked to had already come to their own conclusions about her. They knew that she really left when things got tough. I could have expected that from my close friends, but not from everyone else. I had hints from her friends and others I spoke with who weren't as close to me, but I didn't expect more people to be on my side. So, I let it go and moved on with my life. I haven't received any more messages from Rachel, and things were starting to feel normal again. But just when I thought the waters had calmed, I discovered something else. A coworker messaged me, "Guess who's applying for a job here?" I'm pretty sure you can figure out who my coworker was talking about. Now, she's trying to work at the same company I was transferred to 6 months ago. This can't just be a coincidence. This is where I'm at now. I'm not sure if it's just another attempt by her to sneak back into my life or if it's a coincidence that's playing with my head. Either way, I'm not going to let it ruin my life. I survived cancer, I survived her betrayal, and I'll survive this too. If this is truly her way of trying to force her way back into my life, she's about to learn that it only pushes me further away. Maybe she'll learn it the hard way, or maybe the easy way. I no longer need advice on what to do about her. I already know the answer. Update 2. I didn't want to jump to conclusions about Rachel applying for a job at the same company. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe she really didn't know I worked there. I tried to ignore it and stay focused, but the thought kept gnawing at me. A few days later, I received a message from a colleague in human resources. I've known her for years. She's very discreet and professional, but even she couldn't hide how awkward the situation was when she reached out. She told me that Rachel had listed me as a reference on her job application. Of all the people she could have chosen, she picked me. Not only was it strange, it seemed like a deliberate move. I couldn't tell if it was desperation or manipulation, or maybe both. Why would she assume I'd vouch for her after everything she did? Immediately, I sent an email to HR saying I wasn't comfortable being used as a reference and that I had no intention of speaking on her behalf. I kept it brief and professional. My HR colleague assured me they'd handle it, and I tried to let it go. But Rachel wasn't done yet. 2 days later, I walked into the break room during lunch, and guess who was there chatting with one of my supervisors? She smiled when she saw me, like we were old friends catching up after years apart. I felt like I was in a surreal nightmare. Maybe she thought showing up in person would work in her favor, that it would earn me some points somehow. But all it did was show how out of her mind and confused she was. I barely recognized her and turned to leave, but she shouted my name, loud enough for everyone in the room to hear. She started asking trivial questions, like how I was doing, if I still lived in the same place, and what project I was working on. Everyone was watching, trying to figure out why this stranger was acting so familiar with me. I answered briefly and neutrally, just trying to get through the encounter. When I finally left the room, I overheard her telling someone that we used to be very close. I was furious. She wasn't there for work, she was there to insert herself back into my life. Later that day, I spoke with my manager and explained the situation. No need for every detail, just enough so he understood why I needed boundaries. To my relief, he was understanding. He told me that Rachel's application wouldn't move forward and that I wouldn't have to interact with her in any way. But Rachel didn't take rejection well. The next day, she reappeared in the building. Not for an interview, but just. I'm not sure how she got past security, but she was loitering in the hallway near my office. I ran into her when I had to attend a meeting, and as soon as I did, she tried to stop me. This time, I didn't keep my cool. I told her straight up that she needed to stop. I wasn't trying to get an apology, she was forcing her way back into my life and making things worse. I told her that she had to leave immediately, or we'd call the police, and that I was about to report her to security. After that incident, I filed a formal report with HR and informed security of what happened. I wasn't willing to take any risks. I'm even considering taking it a step further, maybe even getting a restraining order. Though, for now, HR's response is enough for me. That same night, I received a long message from Rachel on social media. She said she didn't realize how much she was upsetting me and that she was just trying to fix things. She kept saying she wanted to prove she'd changed and that she'd do whatever it took to mend what she broke. But here's the thing. I no longer needed her to prove anything. What I needed was for her to get out of my life. The damage was already done. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. I blocked every channel she was using to contact me. Instead, I did something I'd been putting off for a while. I called my mom. I hadn't told her much about what happened with Rachel because I didn't want her to worry. But when I filled her in, she said something that stuck with me. She told me that Rachel's biggest mistake wasn't just leaving, it was assuming that I would always be there waiting for her. And she was right. Rachel had built her life on the belief that I was her backup plan, that when I got better, she could just come back as if nothing had happened. Well, that's over. I don't need her anymore, and I want to build my life far, far away from her. It's funny how life works sometimes. The person you thought would be with you forever is now the one you want out of your life permanently. I thought overcoming cancer would be the hardest thing I'd ever do. But somehow, getting rid of Rachel seems even harder. It almost feels worse than cancer. This is probably my last update, unless something even more unexpected happens. But until then, thank you, everyone. Update 3. After everything that's happened, I thought I'd seen the last of Rachel. But, of course, there was a twist, because life seems to love testing me. A few weeks after the incident at work, I got a message from an unknown number. The first line read, "Please don't block me before you read this." I knew who it was even before I finished reading the sentence. She told me that she was leaving town. I couldn't tell if she was really trying to start fresh or just running away from the mess she created. Apparently, she'd accepted a job in another city, several states away. She wanted to say goodbye and apologize one last time. She wrote about how she didn't know how to live with the guilt of what she'd done, how she felt like she'd not only ruined our relationship but also herself in the process. For a brief second, I almost felt sorry for her. But the word is, almost, she's very good at manipulating people. Not good enough, though, to make me forget everything that happened. That memory brought me back to reality. All Rachel ever wanted was for me to tell her she wasn't a bad person so she could move on without that burden. But she is a bad person. She'll have to learn to deal with that, but that's not my problem, and I'm not going to make things any easier for her. At least that's kept me from filing for a restraining order. I might try that eventually, but I'm not sure a judge would take her into account since she's already moved away. Right now, I'm focusing on the future. I've started going for morning runs, and I'm planning a trip to run a half marathon in a few months. Well, the marathon is the perfect excuse for a getaway. Got me hooked. Edit. The place I'm traveling to for the marathon isn't where Rachel moved. Actually, I'm not even sure where she ended you. Update 4. Before anyone says anything, I did have, and still have, a restraining order in place while all this was going down. I mention it because many comments noted that my ex was showing some concerning behavior, so I applied for one. It wasn't hard to get, thanks to help from work, where her harassment became particularly evident. And it has helped to some extent. It hasn't stopped her from showing up at my workplace, but it did result in her being arrested for 30 days. I know, it's not enough considering how disturbing her behavior has become. Let me tell you what happened. Since my last update, I got the restraining order. I obtained it pretty quickly because I know someone who helped me get in front of a judge. I told my story, and they granted it faster than usual. Still, I had to wait a bit. I felt relieved, thinking that since Rachel had moved away, she wouldn't bother me during that time. However, 2, or maybe 3, weeks later, she was standing outside my workplace. I'm trying to bike to work these days, so sometimes I leave the car at home and ride my bike. That was one of those days. She recognized my bike. I've had it for a long time, even though I haven't used it much lately. And if her previous behavior was disturbing, this was even worse. She was leaning against the bike, clearly trying to stop me from getting on and speeding off. But she wasn't far from the door, so I signaled security to come over. They weren't the same people as during her previous visit because the company had changed the security staff. Still, they were aware of my restraining order and my story, so they called the police when they saw my signal. I told her that I thought she was in another city, and she replied that she had regretted her decision and planned to stay. By then, I knew it was all a lie. She was deliberately stalking me, to the point where I feared she might have a knife or something similar. So, I backed away. She stayed there, still leaning on the bike, probably trying to block my escape and keep me within reach. I slowly moved towards the building entrance, not caring anymore if my bike was at risk. I cared about my own safety. I went inside and waited for the police. She remained outside on her bike, watching me. And it wasn't just a casual glance, it was unsettling. Finally, the police arrived, and I went out to show them my restraining order and explain the situation. They confronted her with questions, and eventually, they took her away. My lawyer informed me that she's been given a 30-day arrest. She wasn't carrying any weapons or anything of the sort, which is standard for a first offense under a restraining order. Sure, it's not the same as her not being around at all, but considering she could have hurt me, the order did serve a purpose. Now, my worry is about what happens in 20 days when that 30-day period is up. I've spoken with her friend, the one who helped me, and she told me that Rachel has been acting strangely lately. I think it's time I install cameras and an alarm system at my place to feel safer. Update 5. Thanks for all the concern. I've already installed cameras and an alarm at my place. I even got advice on which cameras to choose and where to put them. You can tell there's a lot of expertise here. I never moved from my old house since I own it. If I were renting, I probably would have left a long time ago. You can probably guess where all this is heading, and I expected it too. However, nearly a month after her 30-day sentence was over, I started hearing from Rachel again. Last night, around 11 p.m., shortly after I went to bed, I heard noises and the alarm went off. When that happens, the security company that installed the system calls the police to check things out. Meanwhile, I was trying to figure out what was going on. It all seemed normal, until I checked the doorbell camera. I saw a bald person standing just a few steps from the door. I asked who it was, and as they got closer, I could see their face clearly. It was Rachel. She had shaved all her hair off and asked if I liked her new look. She said it was her way of showing solidarity with me for everything I'd been through. I didn't say another word. I just waited for the police to arrive or for her to leave, whichever came first. Eventually, the police showed up, and she was arrested once again. I'm not sure what the consequences will be this time, but I called my lawyer this morning and he reassured me he'll do everything he can to keep her away. Now there's a lot more evidence against her, not just for violating the restraining order. So, all I can do is wait. At least I feel somewhat at ease knowing she's detained and can't come near me for a while. Still, I'd love to find a permanent solution to all this. I'll update you when I know more. Update 6. Things seem to be coming to an end, or at least towards some kind of resolution. I know it's been a long time, but I've been dealing with everything and didn't have concrete news to share until now. Don't worry, my ex hasn't thrown me to the alligators. As I mentioned before, she not only violated the restraining order again, which on its own could have landed her up to 6 months in jail, but she also attempted to break and enter, which adds even more time to her sentence. The resolution ended up being that she's been admitted to a psychiatric center, since it was clear from our recent encounters that she wasn't in a good mental state. In addition, the police searched her place and found disturbing things. Cut out photos of me and even some kind of ritual involving my picture. From what I understand, besides dealing with the betrayal from her ex, she had also been abused. That might explain part of her behavior. Another incident involved a psychotic break while she was detained, during which she tried to harm herself. Because of that, she was hospitalized, as she isn't stable enough to be around the general prison population. Even so, when she eventually gets discharged, if that ever happens, she'll still face potential charges for everything she's done. In total, her sentence is 5 years. She might serve part of that time in the mental institution and the rest in prison, or possibly the entire sentence in the institution if she never gets discharged. So, is this the long-awaited end? I know that in 5 years, all this might happen again, but 5 years is a long time, and I'm not sure if I'll still be living here or if I'll have become the world's best marathon runner by then. I'm leaning toward the former. Either way, I have plenty of time to figure out what I'll do with my life, especially when it comes to Rachel. I still can't thank you all enough for everything you did, especially during my earlier posts when you were such a huge help. The advice on cameras and alarms has been invaluable. Who knows, I might even add value to the house when I sell it, assuming the next owner doesn't have an ex as stalker-ish as mine.
My husband's ex-wife hired a lawyer to make me pay child support for her daughter, but now she has to pay me. I feel incredibly disrespected when all I've ever done is be respectful. I'm having a problem with my late husband's ex-wife, who is demanding that I pay child support, even though my husband passed away just a month ago. Dante passed away last month at the age of 34 when a building collapsed on him. He didn't even make it to the hospital, he died instantly. I got the call about the incident while I was at work, but by the time I got there, he was already gone. Seeing his lifeless body felt like being trapped in a nightmare. I never thought I'd feel so powerless in my life. I was devastated because we had just gotten married 2 months before. Dante had been so excited about the wedding because he saw it as his second chance at happiness. His marriage to his ex-wife, Helen, hadn't worked out, but they had a 7-year-old daughter together, Taya. Throughout my entire relationship with Dante, Helen was always around. She was the classic problematic ex. She took every opportunity to squeeze money out of him and disrupt our plans. Despite all of this, I was always kind and welcoming to Taya because none of this was her fault. I even agreed to have Taya visit us during the holidays because she was part of my family, too. But no matter how polite I was, Helen never liked me. She told me plenty of women had come before me and that I wouldn't get the ring. When Dante and I announced our engagement, she nearly had a heart attack. I remember the look of disbelief on her face. She couldn't even fake her congratulations. It was obvious she didn't mean it. Anyone would have noticed. Well, it's clear she never liked me from the start. Even though I was indifferent to her, when Dante passed, she reached out to me because she said she understood my pain. Because of their history, he still held a special place in her heart, obviously. She was the only person I could really talk to about how I was feeling at the time. I didn't think anyone else truly understood the pain I was going through. I haven't been myself for a long time. I've been trying to get through all the paperwork and sort out his estate, which has been exhausting. I wish I could put it off until I feel stronger, but I can't. I've been handling his estate for the past month, and I'm almost done. Dante set up a college fund for his daughter, but he left everything else to me. I now own his house, his car, and all of his savings. When Helen found out, her kindness suddenly disappeared. She had the audacity to ask me when I convinced Dante to change his will. I snapped at her for even suggesting that I influenced him. I had no idea when Dante changed his will, but it was his choice. If he had left me with nothing, I would have been fine with that. It wasn't my fault that he was always so thoughtful, you know? Helen kept making assumptions about Dante's will to the point that I stopped engaging with her. The only time I interacted with her was when we ran into each other somewhere, like the mall. The moment I saw her, I'd turn around and walk the other way. I thought that if I ignored her, she'd disappear, but that wasn't the case. She was planning something even worse. A few days ago, Helen brought Taya over to visit me. She said Taya missed me a lot, so I let her stay. I assumed Helen wouldn't stick around, so imagine my surprise when she made herself comfortable in my house. She started commenting on how nice everything looked and asked if I had started redecorating yet. Then she said it must be nice not to have to struggle financially. At that moment, I started wondering what her real intentions were with those comments. That's when Helen told me she'd been struggling to take care of Taya. Dante used to pay child support, but now that he was gone, Taya wasn't getting anything. Helen assumed I would continue making the payments, but I hadn't so far. I politely told her that Taya wasn't my biological daughter, so I wasn't obligated to support her. Besides, Dante had left her enough money for her. Response was that I was being selfish and unreasonable. She claimed she had been waiting for a day like this when I would make Taya suffer just because I was her stepmother. I defended my love for Taya and told Helen that things weren't financially stable for me at the moment. But if we could revisit this topic later, maybe we could come to an agreement. Well, obviously, she didn't want to hear that, which just frustrated me even more, and I lost it. The next thing I knew, I saw red. I asked Helen if this was why she had reached out to me at the funeral. Was she trying to make sure I'd keep paying Taya's support, or was she trying to get even more money out of me? She denied everything and claimed I was accusing her of things she would never do. That's when I reminded her how she had made my relationship with Dante difficult from the start. She ruined our date nights, drained his money, showed up at his house unannounced, and did everything in her power to sabotage our relationship. But we still made it through. From the beginning, she had always tried to make my life difficult because she resented me. She knows she can afford to take care of Taya, but she wants that responsibility to fall on me. I love Taya, but she isn't my biological daughter, and she's certainly not an orphan. Her mother is alive and financially stable. Then Helen said I didn't understand her situation, that she had a lot of expenses and debts I didn't know about. I asked her if she thought she was the only person in the world with expenses. I had them too, and I was also grieving and trying to keep my job. I was struggling to get through each day, and I didn't need her adding more stress to my life. All I was asking for was time to revisit this conversation in a few months when I was in a better emotional state. Then we could come up with a plan that worked for both of us because I genuinely wanted to help Taya. But nothing I said got through to Helen. She grabbed Taya and left. Before walking out, she told Taya that I didn't want her in the house, which was a complete lie. I tried to explain to Taya, but Helen rushed her out. Now my husband's daughter hates me because of her manipulative mother, and here I am, stuck with all these conflicting thoughts in my head. Update 1. It's been 2 months since my last post, and during that time, I've started to heal. I've also been supporting Taya as best as I can. I read all your comments, and they helped me make a decision. Now I realize that I was being too hard on Taya because of my conflicted relationship with Helen. It's not Taya's fault that her mom and I don't get along. At the end of the day, Taya lost her father, and I need to be there for her. After giving it some thought, I reached out to Helen to find out how much she needed. Although I couldn't give her the full amount that Dante used to provide, I offered what I had. I had to reorganize a few things, but I eventually found a way to contribute to Taya's expenses. For the past 2 months, I've been paying child support to Helen, and things have been going fine. Helen keeps me updated on how Taya is doing, and I see her every other weekend so we can spend time together. Just the two of us, without Helen around. Taya is still very sad about her dad. She's old enough to understand that he's in heaven, but she misses him a lot. What made things even harder for her was that Helen doesn't have any photos of Dante in her house. When I found out, I decided to give Taya some pictures of her dad. I didn't do it with any bad intentions. I just wanted the little girl to have a picture of her father. However, Helen flew into a rage. She messaged me, asking when I'd ever asked her permission to give those photos to Taya. I thought Helen wouldn't mind, because, well, Dante was Taya's dad. But Helen explained that she doesn't like having photos of her ex around and that I should have consulted her first. I felt she was overreacting, but I decided to back down. Instead, I made a photo album for Taya that she can have when she's older. This issue with the photos isn't the only time I've clashed with Helen. She's been asking for more and more money, claiming she has extra expenses. When I told her I couldn't give her any more, she tried to make me feel guilty. I had to remind her of the agreement we made. I'm not even obligated to help her, and I do it from the heart. If she keeps pressuring me, I might just stop helping altogether. I don't know why I was so naive as to think she'd be grateful. Has Helen ever been thankful for anything in her life? No, she's always acted entitled, as if the whole world owes her something, when that's not the case. She feels like she deserves the money without showing even a bit of gratitude. I don't want to break my word, but I'm getting tired of dealing with her. It's not even about the money anymore. She complains about everything related to Taya. After every visit, she gripes that I'm teaching Taya bad manners. The poor girl just lost her dad. Doesn't she deserve a little comfort? For example, the other day, Helen lost it because I gave Taya a little ice cream on a hot day. She accused me of trying to make her daughter gain weight, as if a bit of ice cream could really hurt her. I tried to reason with Helen, reminding her that Taya is in mourning and sometimes needs small gestures to cheer. Her response? Don't tell me how to be a mother. So I decided to back off because I don't want her to stop Taya's visits. But I don't know how much longer I can put up with Helen's antics. Update 2. So that's it, I'm done. I can't take it anymore, I'm fed up. I'm not going to pay any more child support for Taya. Not when her mom is so ungrateful. I've never met anyone with such a sense of entitlement in my life. Remember when I mentioned that Helen was demanding more money? Well, the situation has only gotten worse in just 1 month. On top of that, she's decided to hire a lawyer to hound me. Things have spiraled out of control quickly, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. A few weeks ago, Helen demanded that I double the child support payments. She claimed what I was paying wasn't enough to cover Taya's basic expenses. Apparently, she thinks she knows what I can afford and believes I've been skimping. I exchanged a few words with her. I won't repeat them here, but basically, I reminded her that she should be grateful for what she's already receiving. Our argument ended with her threatening to sue me for support. She dared me to do it because she was ready to fight until the end. I never thought she'd actually go through with it, so imagine my surprise when I received an email from her lawyer demanding that I double the payments. The lawyer threatened legal action if I didn't comply, just as Helen had said. I replied to the lawyer that there was no way I was going to do that, and well, that was like opening Pandora's box. Over the past few weeks, Helen and her lawyer have taken turns harassing me. Her lawyer, in particular, is on the verge of being unprofessional with all his threats. He's even said they'll put me in jail and seize all my assets. I don't even think that's possible just for child support. I've repeatedly told them to leave me alone and that I'm not going to pay more than what I've already been giving. In fact, they're pushing me to the point where I don't even want to pay a single extra dollar, not 1 cent. Not even a debt collector would hound me like this. I'm exhausted. Every morning I wake up to an avalanche of insulting and threatening messages from Helen. The threats have escalated to the point of insinuating physical violence against me. After receiving several of those threats, I got scared and decided to consult my own lawyer. Honestly, I didn't want to get the law involved. The last thing I need right now is a legal battle, but Helen and her lawyer have forced my hand. I had no choice but to spend money I don't have to hire legal help. In truth, I feel relieved I did because my lawyer told me that what they're doing is completely illegal. Unless I've legally adopted Taya, I'm not obligated to pay child support for her, only her biological parents are. Even though Dante passed away, that responsibility doesn't fall on me. Well, unfortunately for her, she made a big mistake by involving the law. Now I've decided to be, well, a little vengeful. I'm taking her to court. I not only want to win, but I also want her to pay me back every cent I've already given her. And don't even get me started on her lawyer. He's been illegally intimidating me, and I refuse to lose sleep over this nonsense. So, I'm taking them both to court, and I'm going to make them regret trying to manipulate me. I'll keep you all updated on what happens next. Update 3. I've got some hot gossip that's going to blow your mind. You won't believe what just happened. Remember how a month ago I consulted a lawyer about Helen and her lawyer's intimidation tactics? Well, after that, I decided to file a case against them for harassment. My lawyer did everything necessary and sent them the legal documents. The moment Helen received them, she called me in a panic. She was desperate, asking why things had to go so far. I had to remind her that she was the one who wanted to take it to court in the first place. She was the one who instructed her, pseudo-lawyer, to harass me and threaten me with legal action, so I was just giving her what she wanted. I wasn't going to let her intimidate me any longer. I told her that if she wanted me to pay double child support, I'd rather have a judge decide that, not her. Suddenly, Helen's attitude shifted. She asked if we could meet to discuss the matter like adults. Obviously, I had no interest in talking with her. The only time I'd ever meet her would be in a courtroom, so I told her that negotiations were over and we'd settle this in court. Shortly after, my lawyer contacted me with surprising news. Helen's lawyer could no longer represent her. I was confused and asked what that meant. That's when my lawyer explained that Helen's lawyer was actually her nephew, who's still in law school. Helen had paid her nephew to pose as a lawyer just to intimidate me. When he received the legal documents, they panicked. Helen's nephew even begged my lawyer not to proceed with the case and pleaded with him not to tell me. But, of course, my lawyer was obligated to inform me of everything. Besides, it wasn't even my decision anymore because what they did was illegal. Posing as a lawyer and intimidating someone is a crime, and as a law student, Helen's nephew should have known better. When the case finally reached court, I had everything I needed, messages, emails, you name it, all proving their threats and harassment. The judge was not pleased, especially that Helen's nephew had pretended to be a lawyer. He was extremely insulted. As a result, the state pressed separate cases against Helen and her nephew. They were fined for harassing me, and both received restraining orders. If they ever try to contact me in person or online again, they'll face jail time. To top it off, they also have to refund every penny I sent them for child support. But that's not all. Helen's nephew made the biggest mistake of his life. All his years of studying to become a lawyer have gone down the drain. He was expelled from school and disqualified. He'll never be able to study law again. His actions demonstrated a complete lack of integrity and respect for the legal profession, and the judge used him as an example of what happens when you try to play lawyer. I almost feel sorry for him, but not really. I can't even begin to imagine how crushed he must feel. His dreams of becoming a lawyer are completely ruined, and now he has to start his life over from scratch. He was so close to achieving everything he ever wanted, and now it's all gone because he couldn't stop pretending and bragging. Helen and her nephew should have backed off when I told them to. They should have known they had no legal ground to make baseless threats. But they didn't, and now they've lost everything. Honestly, it's been a wild experience, but I'm glad it's finally over. Let this be a lesson to anyone who thinks they can intimidate others. Things like this never end well. I'll keep you updated if anything else happens, but for now, it looks like this chapter is finally closed. Update 4. I really thought everything was settled, but there's one last thing I need to share with you all. Consider this my way of thanking you for your support through all this chaos. None of this should have happened, and honestly, if Helen had been satisfied with the little I kindly gave her, things wouldn't have escalated this far. Or at least, she wouldn't be in the hospital right now. Well, remember her nephew, the one who got disqualified? It turns out his parents were absolutely furious with Helen for dragging their son into her schemes. You can imagine the time, money, and resources they invested to help him get into law school, only for him to ruin it all. Now he'll never have a chance to become a lawyer, and his future is completely ruined thanks to Helen's selfishness. Helen's sister, who is the nephew's mother, was so angry that she attacked Helen at her workplace. She waited for her in an empty parking lot after work and confronted her. By the time security arrived, it was too late. Helen ended up with a broken nose, some seriously damaged ribs, and a badly bruised face. Who would have thought? I always believed Helen's sister was a sweetheart, but I guess anyone can throw a punch when their son's future is at stake, especially against an adult who should have known better. The sad reality is that Helen should have known better. She should never have involved her nephew in this crazy plan. If she was so desperate, she could have asked a friend to pose as a lawyer, or better yet, never demanded more money from me in the first place. I'm pretty sure she just wanted more money to keep funding her unsustainable lifestyle. It's no secret that she loves designer clothes and expensive trips. Dante and I always suspected she was using some of Taya's money to fund her little luxuries, but we never said anything since Taya was being taken care of. Now, her entire house of cards is collapsing, and honestly, I don't feel an ounce of guilt about it. This is what Helen deserves for harassing me during my grieving time and trying to squeeze money out of me. And to top it off, she had the nerve to intimidate me for months. I was only trying to help her, for God's sake, but she showed no mercy toward me, and now I have none for her. It's been 6 years since I last posted here. I know because Taya is now 13, and this update is about her. For those who don't remember, Taya is Dante's daughter, my late husband, with his ex, Helen. The last I heard from Helen was when her own sister sent her to the hospital after the fight that broke out following the whole fake lawyer and lawsuit fiasco. If you recall, Helen had involved her nephew, still in law school, to pose as a lawyer and harass me. Things ended very badly when her nephew was expelled and disqualified from studying law. After all that scandal, Helen's mother stepped in, basically forcing her to let the matter drop after all the damage she'd caused to her family, especially her nephew. Although Helen's sister ended up being sued for the assault, the situation didn't get too messy for her, since Helen's mother helped smooth over the chaos. As you can see, Helen's family is pretty dysfunctional, but luckily, they're not mine, and I've completely cut ties with all that drama. Helen and I ended our relationship for good after she returned all the money she'd illegally demanded for child support. Of course, that only fueled the fire between us, and we haven't had any contact in all these years, which has been a relief. Now, what I really want to share with you is that after 6 years, Taya reached out to me again. It was completely unexpected. We hadn't had any communication since Helen cut off any possibility of us seeing each other, as she insisted I keep sending her money. Needless to say, that wasn't going to happen, so Taya and I lost touch, even though we always had a great relationship. A few months ago, I got a message on social media from an account I didn't recognize. It turned out to be Taya, who'd been trying to find me for a long time. She said she missed me a lot and wanted to talk again. She explained that her mom, Helen, had been very difficult over the past few years. I was so surprised to get that message. Not only did I think Helen had influenced her to forget about me, but Taya was actually taking the initiative to reach out on her own, despite everything that happened between her mom and me. Since then, I've given her my number and we've been in regular contact. We talk every week, and it feels like those 6 years without communication never happened. She tells me about her life, school, and friends. And I, for my part, Share with her how these past years have been for me and how happy it makes me to hear from her again. Reconnecting with Taya has been such a relief because even though I'm not her mother, I've always loved her dearly. Losing contact with her when Helen decided to keep her away from me was incredibly painful. I always knew that I wasn't responsible for her financial support, but that never meant I didn't care about her or didn't value the bond we built while I was with her dad. When Helen completely cut me off after I stopped paying support, it hurt a lot, but I understood that I couldn't do anything more. However, knowing that Taya feels she can count on me and wants to stay in touch has brought me so much peace. Edit. I want to address something some people have been suggesting since my last post, that maybe Helen is behind all of this, that Taya is contacting me for some hidden reason. I've thought about it, and honestly, I don't believe that's the case. Taya hasn't asked me for anything, no money, no favors. We just talk, and our conversations aren't about any complicated issues or about her mom asking for something. Of course, I know I need to stay vigilant, but for now, everything seems genuine. If something strange comes up or I suspect Helen is manipulating Taya, I won't hesitate to cut contact again. I'm not naive, and I'm definitely not willing to go back to that toxic situation. Taya has told me that even though her mom is difficult, Helen has never neglected her or failed to meet her responsibilities. As far as I know, Helen is still keeping Taya in good shape, at least financially. So, although Taya's relationship with her mom is tense, it doesn't seem like she's in any urgent need. Still, I'll keep my eyes open and continue on cautiously.
My cousin punished my son in a way that nearly ended in tragedy, and she thinks it was just discipline. But the way I discipline is by locking her up in a cell. I never imagined that my cousin Ruth, 34, would put my son's life in danger and, when I confronted her, act as if she hadn't done anything wrong. Ruth's son had his confirmation last weekend. The ceremony itself went off without incident. It was long, a bit boring to be honest, but nothing out of the ordinary. The real trouble started at the reception, which was held at the country club. While the adults were chatting and socializing inside, the kids were playing outside in a designated area. I checked on Alex several times during the event, and everything seemed fine. There were other adults around, so I wasn't worried about him. At no point did I notice anything wrong, and I never thought Ruth would take him somewhere else. That's why I was shocked when Ruth pulled me aside and told me that Alex had been acting rudely, talking back, and being disrespectful to the event staff. He's never misbehaved at family gatherings, and I found it hard to believe that he'd suddenly start disrespecting adults. Before I could even ask what had happened, she waved me off, dismissing it. She told me not to worry, that she had already handled it. I asked where Alex was, and with a mocking smile she replied, "Oh, he's just taking a little break in the car." At first, I didn't understand what she meant. Then, it hit me. She had locked my son in the car. I didn't stop to argue or ask why, I just ran. I dashed out of the building at full speed, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The summer heat was stifling. When I saw my car in the parking lot, I thought the worst had happened. The doors were locked, and inside, Alex was crying, drenched in sweat, his face red, his little hands pounding on the window, gasping for air. Panic set in. I grabbed the handles and pulled with all my might, but the doors wouldn't budge. My fingers were shaking so much I could barely hold the phone to dial 911. That's when Eric reached me. As soon as he saw Alex trapped inside, he didn't hesitate for a second. He grabbed a rock and smashed the passenger side window. The glass shattered, but at that moment nothing mattered, because it wasn't my car. I lunged in and pulled Alex out. His skin was burning to the touch. He'd been stuck there for who knows how long under the scorching heat. By then, a crowd had gathered. The country club staff rushed over, and someone had already called the paramedics. And then, Ruth appeared. She looked annoyed, neither guilty nor worried, just irritated that people were making a fuss. And if that wasn't enough, she added something to make it worse, like, "Oh, he was only in there for a few minutes. Maybe now he'll learn not to be so bratty." I'd never felt such rage in my life. My hands were trembling so badly that I had to grab Eric's arm to keep from lunging at her. Eric was tense, as if he were ready to hit someone. He turned to Ruth and asked if she'd lost her mind. He told her she could have killed Alex. She had the nerve to say, "It wasn't that hot, I left the window slightly open." Something she hadn't done. Eric looked like he was ready to strike her. The paramedics arrived and confirmed that Alex was suffering from heat exhaustion and dehydration. They immediately began administering fluids and checking his vital signs. They told us that if we had found him any later, it could have been much worse. And yet, Ruth remained unmoved. She said, "They're so dramatic, my kids would have been fine." I told her we might as well try that on one of the cars and see how it holds up. I was so fed up that we ended up calling the police. Ruth's confidence finally evaporated. Her husband ran over, trying to calm things down. He was just as awful, saying it was only a parenting decision and that we were ruining a family event over a simple punishment. Eric told him that they were out of their minds and that locking a child in a hot car was not discipline. Before things got completely out of control, the police arrived. The officers took statements from us and several witnesses. And when they heard Ruth admit that she had locked Alex in the car as punishment, the officers' faces hardened. They arrested her on the spot. Ruth's husband started yelling at the officers, insisting it was ridiculous and that we were ruining her son's confirmation. One of the officers pulled Eric aside and strongly suggested that we press charges for endangering a minor. And we will. Now, Ruth's husband is trying to defend her, saying that I'm destroying the family. My aunt and Ruth's sisters are calling me a horrible person for involving the police. I don't care. Ruth locked my son in a car when it was 32 degrees out. She deserves everything that comes her way. Edit. First of all, I want to thank everyone for the support and outrage on behalf of Alex. I've seen that some people have asked about certain details of the story, so I want to clarify them here. 1. How did Ruth have access to my car? Some people were confused about how Ruth managed to lock Alex in our car. I should have explained better, it wasn't our car. It was Ruth's car, so she had her own keys to it. That's why I didn't mind Eric breaking her window. 2. Why didn't Alex open the door from the inside? Many asked why Alex didn't just open the door. The truth is, he tried. Ruth activated the child lock on the rear doors before putting him in the car. Alex was trapped. The front doors were also locked, and he was too scared to think clearly. 3. How long was he in the car? We don't have an exact time, but based on the last time I saw Alex playing and when we found him, it was between 15 and 20 minutes. It might not sound like much, but in a car without air conditioning, with outside temperatures over 30 degrees, it was enough time for him to start overheating seriously. The paramedics told us that if more time had passed, it could have been much worse, possibly a heat stroke. 4. Why didn't anyone else help? This is what infuriates me the most. There were people outside, but no one realized what was happening. The parking lot was separated from the event area, and because Ruth left the window barely cracked, Alex's cries weren't loud enough to be heard. It wasn't until Eric and I ran out, shouting, that people turned in that direction. 5. Was this really an arrestable offense? Absolutely. The police didn't hesitate to arrest Ruth after hearing what she did. She admitted to the officers that she had locked Alex in the car as punishment. She never denied it. Given the heat, the duration, and Alex's medical distress, it was classified as endangering a minor. That's why she was immediately taken into custody. 6. Why is the family defending her? This is the hardest to explain. My family has always treated Ruth differently. She's what many call the golden child. Even after she endangered my son, there were people who protected her. At this point, I don't care what the rest of the family thinks. Ruth didn't make a simple mistake. She made a deliberate decision that could have killed my son. I hope this clears up any doubts. At the end of the day, nothing justifies what Ruth did. Neither family loyalty nor an excuse about discipline. She endangered my son's life, and now she will face the consequences. I'm going to press charges and I'm not backing down, no matter how much my family begs me. Update 1. She spent the night in jail. Today she was released on bail and already has a court date for charges of endangering a minor. And well, the consequences of her actions were immediate. but not in the way I expected. I naively thought that after being arrested she would at least show some remorse, that she would realize how close she came to causing serious harm to a child and feel even a bit of guilt. But instead, she dug in even further. As soon as she was out on bail, her family went into full-on defense mode. Her husband started calling everyone, insisting that it had all been blown out of proportion and that I was just an overprotective mom. He never apologized for what his wife did. Instead, he claimed she was only doing it because she couldn't be strict with a kid, a trait he said I lacked. My aunt wants me to drop the charges, saying that even if she made a small mistake, it shouldn't ruin her life. A mistake. That's how they were calling it. Locking my son in a car at 32 degrees, leaving him until he was red, crying, and dehydrated wasn't a mistake, it was child abuse. I'm not going to let anyone manipulate me into thinking otherwise. At first, I ignored their calls and messages because no matter what they did, I was going to press the charges. But then Ruth took to social media. Instead of telling her version of the events, she posted one where she was being punished for nothing, claiming that she had only disciplined my son, without specifying the punishment, and that his mother was just looking for any excuse to ruin her life. I wasn't going to stand for it. A week after the incident, another family gathering was scheduled, the birthday of one of my younger cousins. I wasn't planning to go, but when I heard that Ruth and her husband would be there, pushing their version of the story, I made up my mind. If they wanted to manipulate the narrative, I was going to set the record straight once and for all. Eric hesitated, but he knows me well enough to understand that I had to do it. Not just for myself, but for Alex. Because someday he might hear different versions of what happened, and I wanted to make sure the truth was loud and clear. When I arrived, I could feel the tension in the air immediately. Some family members gave me awkward looks, not sure whose side they were on. Others completely ignored me, so I knew they were on Ruth's side. And there was Ruth, sitting in a corner with her trademark smirk, looking completely calm. She had everyone wrapped around her little finger, so she thought she'd already won. But I told everyone we needed to talk, and I recounted my version of the events. Some relatives had been there that day, but they didn't arrive at the parking lot until after we'd rescued Alex. Other family members hadn't even come for various reasons, so they assumed I just yelled at her and that's why we were arguing. But once I explained what really happened, there was no doubt, and people began to switch sides. In fact, those who had been on Ruth's side started changing their minds. Some even went pale as they realized they'd been supporting the wrong person. I wasn't done yet. I pulled out the medical report, the official document that detailed Alex's condition, confirming dehydration, elevated body temperature, and emotional distress. I read every single detail aloud. Ruth stormed out of the room in a fury. After that night, the story completely changed. Ruth and her husband stopped playing the victim, because they no longer had any way to support their lie. The relatives who had initially backed her fell silent, either out of shame or because they finally understood the gravity of what had happened. And most importantly, no one bought Ruth's lies anymore. This isn't over. Because I've decided, I'm going to sue her in addition to the charges she's already facing. Ruth can try to play the victim in court and see how that goes. Update 2. From the day I had Ruth arrested, I knew I would take this all the way, no matter how many relatives got involved or tried to downplay it. Ruth's trial was a complete disaster for her. She tried to play the victim. She cried in court, saying she never meant to hurt Alex, that she was only trying to teach him a lesson, that she thought the window was open enough, and that she was only going to leave him there for a moment until he calmed down. But it was her own words that betrayed her. There were witnesses who saw that not a single window was open, and that she continued to be indifferent even after it was clear things had gone downhill. Up to that point, she still insisted that maybe now he'd learn not to be so bratty. Her entire defense fell apart. She was found guilty of endangering a minor. She didn't serve any jail time, but she was sentenced to probation, mandatory parenting classes, and worst of all, a restraining order. Officially, she was forbidden from coming near Alex. That should have been the end of it, if Alex weren't my son. I wasn't done. The criminal case was one thing, but I wanted real consequences, ones that would really hurt her. Alex had nightmares for weeks. He refused to go anywhere without me or his dad. He had recurring dreams of being locked in dark places with no way out. So, I took Ruth and her husband to civil court. I sued them for emotional distress, medical expenses, and punitive damages. Her husband, the same one who had been screaming on social media about how I was ruining Ruth's life, suddenly changed his tune. He pleaded with me to settle, saying we could agree on a figure and put an end to it. I refused. I wanted this to go to trial. I wanted every detail of what Ruth did to be laid out before a judge. And in the end, I won. It's not so much about the amount, which is over $50,000, as it is about the precedent this lawsuit sets. If she's thinking of pulling another stunt like this, whether with Alex or some other kid, she'd better think twice. Update 3. It's been several months since Ruth was convicted of endangering a minor, and the full extent of her actions has come to light. I expected that, after everything, she would disappear from the radar and reflect on what she'd done. But unfortunately, that didn't happen. I don't believe she feels any remorse, even as her life keeps getting worse. Maybe after so many blows life deals you, you eventually realize you're doing something wrong, and that's why karma's been so harsh on you. But in Ruth's case, it seems the universe is to blame, not her. The most heartbreaking consequence of Ruth's behavior wasn't the loss of her reputation or even her marriage. It was the devastating effect her actions had on her own son, Seth. For weeks after the incident, Seth became withdrawn. His father, now Ruth's ex, has said that Seth began having nightmares about what happened to Alex, and even worse, he started fearing that his mother might do the same to him. Because you see, Seth was there that day. He witnessed everything with his own eyes. He saw Alex crying, struggling to breathe, and he also saw his mother act as if it was no big deal. To young Seth's mind, it made no sense that his own mother could be so cruel. He started asking questions like, why did mommy do that? And, would she ever lock me in a car if I misbehaved? I'm sure Ruth tried to smooth things over by telling Seth that he wasn't like Alex and that he'd never deserve a punishment like that. In the end, not only was Alex left emotionally scarred, but so was Ruth's own son, the child she claimed to love so dearly. Seth couldn't escape the trauma. He began to reject her, avoiding any contact and backing away whenever she tried to comfort him. When Ruth's ex saw how Seth reacted to his mother, it was the last straw. Yes, the same man who once claimed that his wife was only trying to teach a lesson, but when it came to his own son, he wasn't so sure, especially considering the consequences of that discipline, even though it wasn't directly applied to Seth. He filed for full custody of Seth. And to Ruth's horror, he won. And yes, Ruth tried to spin the story again, claiming that it was her husband who treated Seth badly and that's why she wanted a divorce. But most of us know who's lying and who isn't. We've been with Seth, and he's told his side of the story. Despite all her claims of being a good mother, which is impossible, Ruth is now only allowed supervised visits with her son. And Seth flat out refuses to even consider that option. The divorce came shortly after, with her ex cutting all ties with her. His circle didn't want anything to do with Ruth either, and he eventually moved away with Seth to start over somewhere else. I hope that, by being away from Ruth, her ex loses all the toxicity she brings. I don't know, it seems he's finally woken up. I just hope it works out for Seth's sake. And Ruth? She's completely alone. Not only is she out of work and friendless, but she's also been cut off by most of the family, who don't want anything to do with her. The few who still speak to her are probably just waiting for the next scandal to erupt. I thought it was over with her. I really did. But a few weeks ago, Ruth showed up at my house. I was outside with Alex when I saw her car pull up. I stood my ground and called the police before telling her she had to leave. Ruth got out of her car in a rage, looking like someone who hadn't slept in days. She started yelling immediately, calling me every name in the book. You ruined my life, she screamed. You took my child from me. She had the audacity to say that I was responsible for her losing her marriage and her family. Alex, who was standing beside me, immediately hid behind me and started shaking. I told him to come inside and stay there, but it was clear he was still upset about his aunt showing up again. That was the moment I lost my patience. I stepped forward and said, "You brought this on yourself. Ruth. Now get off my property, because if you stay 1 second longer, the police who are on their way might just come for you. Her expression changed from anger to pure surprise, as if she couldn't believe I was no longer afraid and was willing to give her exactly what she deserved to protect my son. She said she didn't believe I had done that, though I already had, but I told her to stick around and see for herself. She stormed off in a fury, but not before shouting, "This isn't over." But it is over, for her, at least. Since she violated the restraining order, it's the end of the line. To start with, Ruth is jobless, friendless, and estranged from most of the family. Her reputation is completely ruined, and no one defends her anymore. Every time her name comes up at a family gathering, people change the subject or make snide remarks about her. It's as if she's become a pariah. Her ex moved away with Seth, gaining full custody, because he's basically terrified of his own mother. So, things are looking very, very bleak for her. And if that wasn't enough, she was arrested again for violating the restraining order. This little game she thought she had with me is over. Not only has she lost, she's been humiliated. It's time for her to face the reality around her. It was a setback for Alex to see his aunt, but we're hoping he won't have to see her for a long time. That will help him heal. He's receiving professional help, for those asking about that. So we're just waiting for the day when Alex shows improvement. And if those improvements mean that Ruth has to stay far away, and not by her own choice, then as his mother, I'll make sure it happens. Update 4. My responsibility as a mother is to protect my son, and that's exactly what I've done by enforcing the restraining order. Even though I regret that the situation isn't what we had hoped for. We filed a new complaint against Ruth, and due to her violation, she will spend about 3 months in jail. We hired a lawyer to help us with the complaint, with the intention of including the threat and other factors so that Ruth would receive a harsher sentence, hopefully of several years. However, the judge ruled that since this was her first violation and there hadn't been any physical aggression against Alex, it didn't warrant more than 3 months. He even mentioned that in some cases, first-time offenses are only punished with a fine. I then wondered what a restraining order is really good for. We have 3 months to prepare before she's released, because we know that jail isn't going to calm Ruth down and she might even show signs of further violence. If she's been erratic these past few months, I can't imagine the impact that confinement might have on her mind. Our lawyer has put us in touch with a specialist in domestic violence cases to find the best way to mitigate any risk this woman might pose. To be honest, I'm scared at this point because I don't know what Ruth might be capable of next. And the lack of justice that truly acts only adds to my uncertainty. Still, I remain resolute. Eric and I will protect Alex at all costs, no matter how difficult or expensive it becomes. Update 5. These months of preparation turned out to be in vain, but at least they gave me some peace in feeling like we had everything under control. We've taken measures to ensure that Ruth couldn't hurt us, though I won't detail them in case she ever reads this. Fortunately, it hasn't been necessary because Ruth has decided to move away. I wouldn't say she's moved to the other side of the country, but almost as far as that. It's a sad and pathetic ending, but in Ruth's case, it's fair and necessary for everyone else. In this situation, her leaving has been best for our peace of mind. She still has the restraining order, she can hardly see her son, and most of the family has cut her out of their lives. In fact, at this point I'd say the entire family has done so, because even her own mother has said that this is the best decision Ruth could have made. As for Alex, these months without any sign of Ruth have done him a world of good. And when we told him that she's gone, possibly for good, I could tell that his relief was even greater. I hope this is the final chapter of my story and that I won't have to come back to say that Ruth is in this city again. Even so, we still have measures in place for her, and breaking another restraining order will be a bit more severe than the first time. My sister got pregnant by my husband while living with us and wants me to leave so they can be a family, but now she feels cheated because my husband owns nothing. I'm 34, and I let my sister Julie, 28, move in with me a couple of months ago because she was in a really bad financial situation. Julie had lost her job after her company shut down. 2 weeks later, she got seriously ill with West Nile virus. After talking to my parents, I decided to let her stay with me for a few weeks so I could take care of her, monitor her recovery, and help her save on rent since she obviously wouldn't be able to work for a while. She was probably at her lowest point back then, and I was the one who stepped up because our parents don't live nearby, and she doesn't exactly have many friends in a position to help her. It was just something I would do for any family member or friend, help them in a time of need. And she repaid me by having an affair with my husband. On top of that, she had the audacity to tell me that I should move out so they could start their happy little family because she was pregnant. This happened a couple of days ago. Julie asked my husband and me to sit down in the living room because she had something really important to tell us. I thought she was finally going to move out since she had been recovering pretty well in the past few weeks. I assumed she was about to tell us that she was finally going back to work and would be out of our lives soon. Instead, she told us that she and my husband had been having an affair for the past few weeks and that she was now pregnant. When I looked at my husband, I saw that he was just as shocked as I was. Clearly, this was not something she had discussed with him before telling me, which explains a lot. Anyway, after she dropped the bomb about being pregnant with my husband's baby, she added that she understood this was probably a shock to me and that she was really sorry this had happened. But at the end of the day, the past couldn't be changed. Now, she would really appreciate it if I could move out because she would feel very uncomfortable being around me in her current condition. I was furious, but I didn't show it. I just calmly told her that I would not be moving out because this property is mine. If anyone had to leave, it would be her, and she could take my cheating husband with her. They could go start their happy family wherever they wanted because I was filing for divorce, and I didn't even want to see them again. I spoke as calmly as I could, kept my anger in check, and tried to handle the situation with dignity. They had already blindsided me, so I wasn't about to give them the satisfaction of seeing me lose my composure in front of them. After I told her this was my house and I wasn't leaving, she told me I had to. Apparently, she thought I was joking. But then my husband told her that, no, I wasn't joking, and he explained that he was a stay-at-home husband and always had been. Apparently, he had lied to her about everything in the beginning. For context, my husband and I have been together for 8 years, married for 5. A few months after we got married, I decided to take a risk and start my own business. Thank God, it did really well, so my husband and I agreed that he could stay home and work as a writer, something he enjoyed as a hobby but could now pursue full-time. For the past 4 years, he's been at home working on his big novel and handling household chores. We don't have kids, so it's not like he had much to do. The house and everything else belonged to me because I technically paid for it, and we both agreed it was fair for me to own everything. I bet he regrets that now. After he told Julie that he actually owned nothing and had lied to her about everything, she lost it on him and started screaming that she'd been scammed. She called him a fraud and a liar. As entertaining as it was to see her freak out on him, I honestly didn't care at that point. I just wanted both of them out of my house. I had to step in, get them to stop yelling at each other, and tell them to get the hell out of my house right that second. I wasn't going to give them time, I just wanted them gone. My husband is relatively smart. He knew there was no way he could come out of this looking good because nothing is more important to me than my self-respect and dignity. I was never going to forgive a cheater. So he quietly went to the bedroom and started packing. Julie, on the other hand, got on her knees and started begging me, saying she would do anything to make things right but that she needed a place to stay. She said I couldn't throw out a pregnant woman, especially when she was having a baby that would be my nephew. The fact that she brought up family was what really pissed me off. So I grabbed her by the arm, forced her to stand up, dragged her to the door, and then physically shoved her outside. I was rough with her, but I didn't care. Hearing her say we were family after what she had done infuriated me. We weren't family when she was screwing my husband, but now she wanted to use that as an excuse? Once she was outside, she started begging me not to do this, but I slammed the door in her face. Then I went to the guest room, shoved all her things into her suitcases in a messy, careless way, and within minutes, I threw them all outside with her. I told her to get lost or I'd call the police. She kept crying, but I just shut the door and went back inside. A few minutes later, my husband walked out with his bags, telling me how sorry he was. I pretended not to hear him. Julie kept sobbing and begging on the porch for about an hour after he left, but I put on my headphones and completely tuned her out. At some point, I realized I couldn't hear her crying anymore, and I knew she had finally left. That same night, I called my lawyer, told him everything that had happened, and said I wanted to file for divorce. I planned to tell my friends and family later, but the next day, I got a call from my parents telling me that what I had done was horrible. To my parents, I had been cruel and heartless toward my sister, someone who had already been through so much lately. I was shocked because my parents have always treated Julie and me equally. It's not like she was the favorite or anything, but hearing them defend her like that did not sit well with me. They told me that they knew she was pregnant and that I couldn't throw her out in that state, especially when I knew she was between jobs and still recovering from a serious illness. They said it would take time for her to get back on her feet, and she had no one else here who could take care of her as well as I could. Then they had the audacity to say it wasn't her fault, my husband had seduced her. So I asked them, what sister? I don't have a sister. Then I told them I had every right to kick her out because she was the one who had an affair with my husband. They kept going on and on about how harsh I had been with her. I got tired of listening and just hung up. We haven't spoken since. So, do you think I was wrong for kicking my pregnant sister out of my house? Update 1. I know some people think kicking a pregnant woman out of my house is horrible, but keeping her here after everything? That's just insane. Luckily, most people agree that I did the right thing and that she needs to figure out her own living situation. Moving on with the update, unfortunately, all of this has hit me really hard. But I can't just take time off to process it. I'm the boss. I have to put on a strong front and keep going. So at work, everything has been business as usual. But the second I get home, I break down because, honestly, I'm emotionally wrecked. I've been holding it together these past few days, but now it's really starting to hurt. My lawyer and I filed for divorce a couple of days ago, and I think my husband will be served soon. I know he won't contest it. He knows me well enough to understand that if he tries, I'll make sure he regrets it. But at the end of the day, none of that changes how much this hurts. Winning the divorce won't magically make me feel better. I just can't wrap my head around why, after 8 years together, he would cheat on me with my own sister. I truly believed we were in love. I honestly thought we'd grow old together. But now, I'm questioning everything we've had over the years. Maybe she wasn't the only one he cheated with. Maybe this is just the first time he got caught. Even the thought of that breaks my heart, but there's nothing I can do except accept it and move on. Since I kicked him out, my husband has been the only one who hasn't tried to contact me. My parents have, and so has Julie, but that's different because I know they just want me to let her back in so she can keep freeloading off me. It's even crazier that my parents are taking her side right now. In my original post, I mentioned how my parents never had a favorite child. They always treated Julie and me equally. But now, honestly, I don't even know what to think. I had no expectations from Julie. We were never best friends, but we didn't have a bad relationship either, which is why I agreed to help her out and let her stay here. We had a spare room anyway, so I figured, why not? My parents wanted me to help her too, so I didn't see a problem with it, because that's what family does. At least, that's what I thought. What I never expected was for her to betray me like this. I never thought that someone I'd been helping for months would stab me in the back. But with my parents, it's a different story. They've always been fair and reasonable, so I expected them to be upset with Julie. And to be fair, I think they are. From what they said, it's clear they're not happy with how she handled things. But they keep insisting that what's done is done, and now we just have to accept it and move forward. I don't know what's wrong with them, but they've seriously disappointed me with how they're handling this. I think I've lost all the respect I had for them, and I don't see myself getting it back anytime soon. Right now, I'm emotionally drained, and mentally, I'm just trying to focus on work. My personal life is in shambles. I haven't even told my friends about any of this yet, but I know I'll have to at some point. After all, my husband and I share a lot of mutual friends, and I'd rather they hear it from me than from him. I have no idea what he's telling people at this point. I don't know what to expect from anyone anymore. For now, I'm just trying to focus on a couple of things. First, making sure my work doesn't suffer, which I won't let happen. And second, handling the divorce. I'm 90% sure he won't contest the terms since I'm being pretty fair and reasonable, but there's always that small chance he might try something. Right now, everything feels uncertain. So I'm getting all my paperwork in order just in case. Other than that, I'm just trying to keep my head clear because the last thing I need is to spiral. That's not an option right now. But honestly, venting about all this here has helped a lot. And I seriously appreciate all of you who reached out, commented on my post, and shown your support. You have no idea how much it means to me. Update 2. As I expected, after being served, my husband reached out to tell me he wasn't going to contest the divorce. He said the terms were fair. He sent me a text saying all of this, and in the next one, he told me that over the past few days, he'd been trying to think of a way to apologize to me but couldn't come up with anything that didn't feel weak or insincere. So, he decided to just get it off his chest and say he was really sorry, via text. He told me he had lied to Julie just to impress her because lately, he'd been feeling weird about not owning anything and having to rely on his wife financially. We don't even have a child, so he couldn't even have the dignity of being a stay-at-home dad. He felt useless. And since his novel wasn't progressing well, he felt like he had wasted 4 years of his life on something that was going nowhere. He had been feeling particularly down about it but couldn't even admit it to himself, let alone talk to me about it. He said he felt really bad about himself, and when Julie showed up, before he could even think about how messed up it was, he started lying to her about everything, trying to impress her. Not long after, they were sleeping together. He thought it was just going to be a one-time thing, and even though he felt guilty, he couldn't stop himself. He needed some kind of escape from everything he was dealing with, and that was his way of coping. But then she got pregnant, and we had that awful conversation 2 weeks ago, after which everything went to complete hell. He told me he was truly sorry for everything he had done. That he had destroyed everything we had, but he promised that this was the first and only time he had ever cheated on me. He swore it had never happened before and said he really needed me to believe him on that. Maybe, someday in the future, if I could, he hoped I'd be able to forgive him for everything he did wrong. That was the message. And after reading it, I ended up crying because it was just another reminder of everything I had lost. I thought I had a man I loved, who loved me. But in the span of a single day, I lost all of that. Trust me, it's not easy to deal with. I know that anyone who's ever gone through a divorce or been cheated on probably knows exactly what I'm talking about. I could sit here and say a bunch of awful things about him just to make myself hate him right now, but at the end of the day, it still hurts. And I hate myself for crying over that message. But at least, after I was done crying, I found the strength to block him without responding. Honestly, as upset as I was about everything, he didn't deserve a reply. I wasn't going to forgive him. Especially not now, when everything is still so fresh. After a while, though, I actually started feeling a little angry about everything he had said. Because all he had to do was talk to me. I never, ever made him feel bad for choosing to stay home and work on his novel. I'm not a very creative person. I've never been into writing or anything like that, aside from now, since I really need to get all of this off my chest. But I respected his creative side. I never had a problem with him staying home. Maybe his fragile male ego just couldn't handle it. Maybe other people made comments. Maybe he just grew resentful. But after 8 years together, the least he could have done was tell me what he was feeling. We got married to support each other, and I would have been there for him. Maybe we could have figured things out together. But he chose not to. He chose to lean on Julie instead. And that's how we ended up in this mess. The more I think about it, the more disgusting and pathetic it all seems. The fact that he lied to her about so many things just to make himself seem bigger and better is pathetic. I loved him for who he was, but that wasn't enough for him. This will just never make sense to me. At least with Julie, I get her motive. She wanted my life handed to her without putting in any effort. She thought she could get it by getting pregnant and moving in with my rich husband. So I can just choose to erase her from my life now. In a few months, I'll be done with the divorce, and then I'll never have to see him or think about him again. Update 3. It's been a couple of days since my last update, and things had been pretty quiet. But this morning, my parents showed up at my house. I found it strange because, for the past few years, ever since they moved to my dad's hometown to run the family business with my uncle, they've hardly ever visited me. Usually, it was Julie and me who had to go see them. So the fact that they had actually taken a flight to come see me was already a big deal. But I knew they were only here to talk about Julie. That's why, when I opened the door, I told them that if they were here to talk about her, I really didn't want to hear it. After all, there's only one Sunday a week, and I wasn't about to waste mine going over the same thing again. I had already said everything I needed to say, and so had they. There was nothing left to discuss. I also made it very clear that I would only let them in if they apologized to me first. So they could either apologize right then and there or leave. My boundaries were firm, but my parents told me they had come specifically to talk to me about Julie. They said we had to talk about it because the way I was treating them wasn't right, and the way I was treating Julie wasn't right either. To them, we were family, and we handled things differently. Once again, they were pulling the family card. And just like with Julie, I lost my patience with them too. This is not how families treat each other, at least, not the kind of family I'd want to have. Though I will give them that in this family, we sure do handle things differently, like my sister sleeping with my husband and me kicking her out of my house. That's definitely different from how normal families operate. I completely called my parents out. They kept trying to stammer and come up with arguments, but I didn't even let them speak. I shut down every single excuse they tried to make. By the time I was done, my mom was literally in tears. But they were in my territory. I could talk to them however I wanted, especially since they had decided to bother me first thing in the morning. This was a conversation they should have been having with Julie, the one who actually did something wrong, not me. Anyway, after I finished yelling at them, my mom was crying so hard that my dad just told me he never wanted to speak to me again because I was a horrible daughter for making my own mother, who gave me life, cry like that. But I don't care. They can think I'm crazy. I know I'm not, and that's enough for me. If anyone's crazy, it's my parents. Though, to be fair, my sister isn't all that sane either. Update 4. It's been a month since my last update, and I haven't been in contact with anyone from my family, not Julie, and definitely not my parents. All I know is that they're still sending her money. As for my soon-to-be ex-husband, I've heard from a couple of people that he's now living with his parents. Once the divorce is finalized, he plans to move to another state. Before you ask, I have no idea what he's going to do about his child. At this point, pretty much all our friends know exactly what happened, and most of them have started cutting him out of their lives. Well, most of them. Some people don't want to get involved and are trying to stay neutral. All I know is that my life is slowly but surely getting back on track, and I'll do whatever it takes to protect my peace from now on. I'm not exactly happy, but at least I'm at peace, which is an improvement from last month. Little by little, I know I'll be happy again. I mean, bad things always come to an end eventually, right? Update 5. I have a fresh update because some things have happened that you might want to know about. So I won't leave you hanging. Julie lost the pregnancy, and she's been blaming me for it. According to her, the stress I caused her is the reason she miscarried. My parents are on the same bandwagon. The good thing is that they're not bothering me directly. These are just things I'm hearing from so-called neutral people. You know, the ones who claim they don't want to take sides but somehow still feel comfortable accusing me of killing a child out of pride. I find it funny because none of them have actually taken Julie into their homes. So, by their own logic, shouldn't they be just as guilty as I am? I tried to be a good sister to her. I helped her when I could. But if she betrays me, then she's no different from a stranger to me. She's not my responsibility anymore. If she really cared about her pregnancy, maybe she shouldn't have slept with someone else's husband, let alone her own sister's. Or at the very least, she could have used protection. None of this makes sense in the little fantasy world some people live in, but I don't care. When accusations come from people as irrational as them, they're not worth my time. Update 6. My ex-husband reached out to me a few hours ago, and you won't believe what he had to say. No, he didn't ask me to take him back. We haven't exactly ended things on bad terms, relatively speaking, which is why I answered. He's owned up to his mistakes like a man, and at least he made the divorce process easy for me. So I don't hold a grudge. Honestly, I do it more for myself. It's just not worth my time to hate him or think about him at all. No cheater is. But what he had to say was interesting, because he basically confirmed that my sister was never pregnant. He called to tell me because he knew a lot of people were talking badly about me and felt I needed to know the truth. He also made sure to tell those people as well. He figured it out because he had repeatedly asked her for proof of the pregnancy and had offered to go with her to doctor's appointments, but she always dodged it. Then, suddenly, she lost the baby. When he asked for proof, she didn't have any. He even talked to my parents, and they didn't have any proof either. There's no evidence she was ever pregnant or that she ever had a miscarriage. One day, she just woke up and told everyone she had lost the baby. And that's that. And here's a huge middle finger to everyone who accused me of making her lose the baby. Now my parents are suddenly trying to contact me to repair our relationship, and they've even stopped supporting my sister now that they're not going to be grandparents. But that doesn't mean anything to me. I don't care what they do with my sister now. What I wanted was for them to support me, like any decent parents would when their daughter is betrayed. So, no, the middle finger is for them too. So, let's recap. My sister lost a sister, a house, and my help because she slept with my husband and faked a pregnancy. And my parents lost a daughter because they chose a fake pregnancy over me. Honestly, I think all three of them should just go to Vegas and gamble. Maybe they'll have better luck there.
My wife filed for divorce because her friends like being with rich men and she wants to try that life. But now that she's looking to come back, I told her that we don't need her around with the kids. About 7 months ago, Emma, my ex-wife, 42, and I, 44, moved because of her new job. She'd been offered a high-level position at a company she applied to without my knowledge. The reason she did it was that she knew I'd never agree to move. We'd been together for 12 years, married for 10, and we have 8-year-old twins. Both of our families live here, and a few years ago, my father was diagnosed with leukemia. Since then, our family's been struggling because his health has been poor, and we're always on edge, fearing we might lose him. Naturally, as his only son, I want to be here for him, and for my mom, too. So I couldn't bring myself to move. After my father's diagnosis, I thought Emma would understand what was going on, but instead, she told me I was being too sensitive. She said I couldn't keep turning down job opportunities out of state and expect her to do the same just because my father was sick. In fact, before he got sick, we'd actually been planning to move because she wanted a change of pace. But after the diagnosis, I told her it wasn't possible for me anymore. At first, she tried to understand, but gradually, over the past year or so, she started feeling restless, and we ended up fighting a lot about it. She wanted to move because she felt stuck here, while I couldn't imagine leaving my dad in such a condition, especially since it would also mean leaving my mom to handle everything on her own. Even if I had siblings, I couldn't have left because my conscience wouldn't have allowed it. I tried explaining that to Emma, but she wouldn't see my point of view. She thought I was selfish, and in her eyes, I was the one being selfish. Then, earlier this year, one day she came home from work and told me she'd applied for a well-paying job out of state, and she got it. That took me by surprise. I wanted to be happy for her, but I just couldn't because she hadn't mentioned anything about the application or the job beforehand. I was in shock, so I just congratulated her and said nothing else that day. I remember we later got into an argument because she felt I wasn't happy enough for her success, even though it was a huge deal. I mean, it was a good job with a decent salary. What really bothered me was that she never even thought to talk to me about it before applying. She admitted she didn't think she'd actually get the job, but now that she did, she was planning to move, and she wanted me to come with her. She wanted to relocate our whole family, fully aware of how I felt about moving. We ended up fighting over it, and it was one of our worst fights ever. It got so bad that she ended up staying with her parents for a couple of days, and we had no contact during that time. I even thought she'd file for divorce and end our marriage for good. But then she came back, and we decided we'd try to work things out, for the kids' sake. At that point, I still believed our marriage could work because I didn't want to give up on us. I was sure I loved her, and she told me she loved me too, so she wanted it to work. But she also didn't want to give up on her dreams. After many arguments, we agreed that she'd take the job while I'd stay behind. She promised to travel back and forth as much as she could so we could make it work. We had no choice but to try a long-distance marriage for now, since neither of us was ready to let go. I struggled to accept it, but I had to, for the time being, until we could figure out our future. So, she left and started coming home every other weekend. Even then, she could only spend 2 days with us, catching a flight back on Sunday afternoons because she had to be at work on Monday. I knew it was exhausting for her, but there was nothing I could do since she'd agreed to the arrangement. Over time, I suppose she started resenting me, and her attitude toward me only worsened. We promised each other we'd make this work, but every time I tried to call her during the week, she was always so cruel and we'd end up arguing. Eventually, it felt like she didn't even want to talk to me. I started waiting for her to call first, and then we spoke less and less. Even when we did talk, it was always cold and awkward. I didn't know what to think. Finally, after nearly 4 months apart, one weekend she came home with divorce papers. Things were really tense between us at that point. She told me she couldn't take it anymore when she returned that weekend. We hadn't spoken for almost 6 days straight after our last big fight, when she actually brought up the idea of ending our marriage for good. I should have seen it coming for months. Not only had we been fighting, but she'd also grown close to a high school friend. This friend, let's call her Melissa, was not a good influence at all. Emma had always been close with Melissa. She was even a bridesmaid at our wedding. But I never liked her because she always gave off a weird vibe. From what I knew, Melissa was a total gold digger who chased rich, married men so she wouldn't have to commit but could still reap the benefits. She'd even brag about it, as if it weren't already despicable enough. Whenever I mentioned Melissa's behavior, Emma would say it was her personal choice and that I shouldn't judge her. That was so irritating that eventually I stopped talking about Melissa and decided to ignore that friendship entirely. It got a little easier when Melissa moved away and Emma got busy with work and the kids, so they drifted apart a bit. I knew Melissa had also been living in the same state with her son for a couple of years after her second divorce, probably looking for new conquests. Coincidentally, when Emma got a job in that state, she reconnected with Melissa, who introduced her to the city and helped her move. I hoped Melissa had mellowed out over the years, but she was still the same odd person. I wasn't comfortable with Emma being that close to Melissa again, but she was Emma's only friend there, so I couldn't say much about it. In the months Emma had been away, she told me that Melissa had been very supportive since Emma was alone, and even introduced her to a couple of her own friends. This group was pretty strange. A bunch of 3 or 4 single moms who met on Facebook and formed some kind of support group. According to Emma, these women had been with men, had children, and for various reasons, their partners abandoned them, leaving them with only child support. It wasn't as tragic as it sounds, because most of these women were like Melissa. They chased rich men, had affairs, got pregnant, and when the men chose to stay with their families, these women managed to get a hefty amount of child support to maintain their lifestyle. In reality, it wasn't just financial support. It was like a bribe to keep quiet, since those men didn't want their affairs to be exposed. It was common for all of them to run some online business that no one really cared about. They claimed to be self-employed and independent, but they were basically running a scam. Emma found it amusing, but I found it disgusting, and I didn't think it was a good idea for her to hang out with them. Still, she defended her friends, saying she'd met them in person and that they were really nice. Since we were already fighting about so many things, I didn't want to start another argument, so I stayed quiet. But during our last fight before she filed for divorce, she told me she really admired Melissa's strength, how she was raising her 2 kids brilliantly on her own, without any help. I ended the call snippily and told her that anyone who makes a living by getting pregnant after an affair with a rich man is probably only looking after a lottery ticket, not the kids. That sparked a huge fight. The frustration that had been building up for months finally exploded that day. We started cursing at each other, telling each other exactly how much we hated the situation, and we blamed one another completely. At one point, she said that if we were going to fight like this forever, it was best for each of us to go our separate ways, and then she hung up. I thought she wasn't serious and would call back to apologize, but she never did. I was so angry with her that I didn't even reach out. That weekend, she showed up with the divorce papers, and I decided to move forward because I couldn't find any reason to stay with her. We had tried to make it work, but we just couldn't. Even the kids, whom we were supposed to be together for, rarely saw us together, and when we did, we weren't happy. So rather than let them grow up in a toxic environment, we decided to divorce. The divorce process was relatively simple since our state has no waiting period, and we only had to split our joint assets, which went pretty smoothly. I kept the house and the kids since she didn't want to take them at that moment, and she agreed that for now she'd come by every week to see them. We had been sharing the cost of raising them anyway, so that continued. Once they were a bit older, we'd let them decide what they wanted to do. It wasn't ideal for either of us, but we didn't want to fight over custody because we believed our kids deserved both of us. As for the house, we had a verbal agreement that we'd sell it in a few years and split the proceeds. The divorce was finalized about a month ago, and I didn't expect her to even want to talk to me afterward. Even during the divorce process, we barely spoke outside of meetings with our lawyers. Now that everything is settled, I'm just trying to cope. Although nothing seems to have changed since we're still stuck in the same routine, life is definitely going to be very different for me now that I'm no longer married to Emma. My kids are also very confused about what's happening, so I had to explain that their mom and I are no longer together. Then, last night, she called me again to try to work things out and give our relationship another shot. Apparently, she realized she'd made a huge mistake and wanted to undo the divorce. I could tell she'd been crying and was pretty hysterical on the phone. She started ranting about how she'd unintentionally idealized the lifestyle that Melissa and her friends live. Because of that group, she hadn't mentioned anything before. I know how I feel about Melissa. But after our last fight, she talked with her group of friends, and they told her to go through with the divorce. At first she was skeptical, but they convinced her. Then she even talked to a lawyer who was recommended to her. It's been a month since then, and she's literally tried everything to move on, dating apps, blind dates, going out almost every night, but she's only ended up having one-night stands. This has made her feel pathetic because, at least when we were fighting, she knew we still loved each other. Now she's really alone and, more than anything, she misses the kids. Her friends told her that this would pass, but she hasn't been able to shake the loneliness and guilt after the divorce. Also, her company was doing really well when she joined, but she's had several pay cuts since then. Apparently, they exaggerated how good things would be to lure her in, and her current salary doesn't match what was initially promised. And she's not the only one. Everyone in the company is going through the same thing. They keep telling people that things will get better if they work hard, but she believes it's just to keep employees from leaving. That's another reason why she wants to come back to me. She said she really wants me to consider undoing the divorce because she just misses her family and what used to be her life. But after she finished explaining everything to me, I got furious because I couldn't believe she'd let her immoral friends convince her to get a divorce. I'd always warned her about Melissa and made it clear I didn't like the company she kept after moving, but she never listened, and now they turned out to be the reason she made that decision. If it had been solely her mistake, I might have been understanding, but the fact that she chose to listen to people I despise really pissed me off. The nerve of calling me and starting to cry about it all, as if it were all so easy for me. It just made me furious. I ended up exploding on her and told her that if she really felt alone and guilty, she should ask her friends for help. I'm sure if they were the ones who pushed her into getting a divorce, they'd care enough to help her financially and emotionally. I was also really upset that she basically admitted she'd been having one-night stands with random people over the past month since our divorce. Technically, she's single and can do whatever she wants, but it made me feel incredibly uncomfortable and depressed, because it felt like she had devalued everything we'd shared over the last 12 years. So I told her I didn't want her back in my life, especially after everything she just said, and that I'd make sure the kids stayed with me because I wasn't sure she was a good influence on them. She started crying even harder and told me she'd do whatever it took to fix things. But I told her she'd made her decision and had to live with it, that the kids and I didn't need her anymore. Then I hung up and blocked her. When I woke up this morning, I had several messages from my ex-in-laws. They were telling me I shouldn't have said those things because she was already really depressed, and that it wasn't nice of me to kick her when she was down. They said it wasn't necessary since she was already regretting everything she'd done, and it seemed like I was just punishing her further by saying the kids and I didn't need her. I wouldn't have cared what my ex-in-laws said, but they've been very kind to me since the divorce. So, I don't know. Am I really the bad guy for telling my ex-wife that I don't want her back, and that the kids and I don't need her anymore? Update 1. Thank you so much for all the support you've shown in the comments. I don't know how to express it, but it really means a lot to me to know that so many people are on my side in this situation. It means even more that so many of you have identified with my story and reached out to tell me that things will get better. That's incredibly kind of you, and I truly believe things will improve. It's been 4 days since I posted, and I blocked Emma after our conversation, so she hasn't been able to contact me. This weekend, she's supposed to come see the kids and spend some time with them, so I'm not sure what will happen then. Over the past few months since the divorce process started, she would only pick up the kids from my house and then head to her parents' place to spend the weekend with them, occasionally coming over for some family activities with the 4 of us. But for the most part, she tried to keep her distance from me, and I was okay with that because it just made things easier for me. This weekend, however, is uncertain. Honestly, I'm a little worried about having to see her because her parents have been very upset with me. They told me that what I said was so harsh that she's been crying every time they called her since then. I haven't responded to any of their messages because I really don't know what to say. I do feel a bit bad because I know Emma isn't usually very emotional, yet I managed to hit a nerve since she's been crying so much. Even though she hasn't been exactly kind to me and our circumstances haven't been great, I still feel really sad for her because we could have had a great life together. I feel like she ruined it all herself. I did my best to make things work, but it's not like I could keep our marriage going on my own without any help from her. Honestly, I don't know what to say. Update 2. Emma came by yesterday to pick up the kids, and we ended up having a conversation about everything that's been said. It was obvious from her appearance that she was going through a really rough time, something you could see on her face, and it was incredibly hard for me to be cold with her. She asked if I'd be willing to talk, even just a little bit, and I eventually agreed. Once the kids were in her room, we started talking. She told me she was truly sorry for everything, not just for the recent months but for the past few years as well. She admitted it had taken her a long time to realize just how selfish she'd been, and she even said she didn't deserve to be with me. She explained that in the past few weeks after the divorce, whenever she went on a date or met with a man, all she could think about was how uncertain she was about whether that was really the life she wanted for herself. She felt guilty for throwing everything away. She'd built up this idealized notion, but it wasn't nearly as amazing as she thought it would be. By the time she realized that, it was too late. I'd already lost her. As she spoke, she started crying again. I tried to comfort her, but she told me that would only make her feel worse because it would remind her of what a terrible person I am and how badly I'd treated her. It was a bittersweet moment hearing her say those things about me, because I would have appreciated that honesty when we were together, but now I'm not sure what to do with it. Anyway, after a while, she told me that she had decided to quit her job and move back here to be closer to her family. She also said she wanted to spend more time with the kids since she missed so much of it. She realized it wasn't worth staying away for so little money and sacrificing so much. The only request she had for me was not to file for full custody, like she'd hinted I might. I told her not to worry. I'd said that in the heat of the moment, and I had no intention of doing it anyway, because both she and I have always taken good care of our kids. I knew they missed their mom, so spending more time with her would definitely be good for them, and I supported that. After we finished talking, she apologized once again and told me I was a good man. She also promised she'd try to be a better mother and a better person, and she thanked me for letting her talk to me after everything that had happened instead of just slamming the door in her face. That touched me a little, but I didn't say anything more, and then she left with the kids. That's it. I didn't expect things to turn out this way. I thought she'd come and fight with me, but it ended up being pleasant and unexpected. She apologized, and while I can't say I forgive her or that it's all in the past, at least we're on the right track now. I don't think I can ever fully go back to her. That seems unrealistic after everything that's happened. But the least we can do is try to raise our kids in the best, most peaceful environment possible. And of course, that's better for both of us. Now, let's see what the future holds. Update 3. Well, it's been 4 months since my divorce, and after my last update, Emma kept her word. A few weeks ago, she left her job and moved back here. Since then, our kids have been splitting their time between both of us. They spend half the week at my place and the other half with their mom, and so far it's been working pretty well for them. Emma initially stayed with her parents, but she found an apartment just a few blocks away. Now the kids are enjoying life with 2 homes. As for my ex-in-laws, things are back to normal. We don't talk regularly, but they apologized for bothering me during Emma's crisis. They told me it wasn't my fault, but as parents, they were really stressed out and ended up taking it out on me reflexively. Emma and I are also on good terms again. I wouldn't say we're friends, but we're cordial, and things have stayed civil. I'm slowly moving on, too, trying to process everything that's happened. So far, things are looking up, and I'm hopeful that it will only continue to get better. Update 4. It's been almost 7 months since my divorce, and I wanted to share a significant update. A couple of months ago, I met someone, and we've started dating. She's a single mom, and her kids are around the same age as mine, which I think could be a really good thing. It's been nice to be with someone again, and I feel good about this relationship. As for my kids, I think they'll be incredibly understanding. They've often told me that it would be okay if I started dating someone, that I didn't have to be alone. Because of that, I've been seriously considering introducing them to my new girlfriend. I believe they'll handle it well, and it'll be a positive transition for everyone. They might even get along with my girlfriend's kids. However, this update isn't just about that. It's also about something that happened with Emma. A few days ago, when Emma came to pick up the kids, she asked if we could sit down and talk. I assumed she wanted to discuss something about the kids, so I agreed. We sat in the living room while the kids were upstairs finishing packing their things. To my surprise, Emma told me that it had been a long time since our divorce, and now that we were getting along well, she wanted to go on a date and see how things would go. She explained that since she moved back to town, she hadn't dated anyone and hadn't been in touch with Melissa or her other friends. For her, this would be a chance to see how she felt and whether we could rekindle what we had. It was a little awkward, given what I mentioned earlier, and I wasn't sure how to say it. But in the end, I told her that I had already met someone and was even considering introducing her to our kids. Even though we were in a better place and got along well, I didn't think getting back together was a good idea. Emma took it well and thanked me for being honest with her, but I could tell she felt a little hurt. The truth is, even if I hadn't met someone, I still believe giving our relationship another shot would be a bad idea. Update 5. I wanted to give a small update on how things are going. First, regarding my dad, since many people have been asking, he's still battling his health issues, but I'm relieved to say he's improving little by little. It's been a long and complicated process, but he's a fighter, and his progress has given all of us a bit of hope. As for my personal life, I recently introduced my kids to my new girlfriend. I was a little nervous at first, but I'm really happy to say they received her well. They seem to get along with her, and that's been a huge relief for me. Knowing my kids are comfortable and happy with this new dynamic gives me a lot of peace of mind. Also, I recently had the chance to meet my girlfriend's kids. We decided to have a barbecue at my place so everyone could spend time together in a relaxed environment. It was an amazing day. The kids got along really well, playing and laughing as if they'd known each other forever. I'm really happy with how things are moving forward, both in my personal life and with my dad's health. I truly appreciate all the support and well wishes from everyone. My parents and my pregnant twin sister made me live in a tent in the yard when they kicked me out of the house. Now I have a house, and they demand to move in. My sister asked my parents to kick me out of the house when I was 16, saying there wasn't enough space for me. I struggled for 12 years to have my own place, and now they're trying to let my sister move in with me because she's pregnant with her 4th child. I have suffered my parents' toxicity since childhood. I have a twin sister who has been a pain in the ass. People say twins support each other. In my case, my twin has always dragged me down whenever she had the chance. If the bullying in my childhood wasn't enough, she reappeared in my life. This time, she wants to move into my house with her family, despite being the one who kicked me out when I was 16. She has always been narcissistic, largely due to how she was raised. My parents always wanted a daughter, but they ended up having a son along with her. They even told me directly that they would have terminated the pregnancy if it had only been me. Just because there was a girl on the way, they had to bring me into the world, so according to them, I owe my life to my sister. She never misses an opportunity to remind me of her right to everything. You can easily imagine my childhood growing up in a home where I wasn't wanted. Everything revolved around my sister. Despite being the same age, I wasn't allowed to touch her toys. She got new sets of clothes from time to time, while I only got a couple of pieces at Christmas and another on our birthday. If we didn't share a birthday, they wouldn't even bother celebrating it. Or, I just realized that if I didn't share my birthday with my sister, I wouldn't even exist. I received the bare minimum, and these things weren't out of love but to save face in front of the critical eyes of relatives. The only good thing about my childhood was my grandfather. He was the only one who could see through the lies. Unfortunately, he passed away when I was 13. That was the worst day of my life. I had no one left to back me up. We lived in a small house on the outskirts. My sister and I shared a room. It was more like I had a bed in a tiny closet under my sister's bed. The whole room was filled with her clothes, toys, and posters. I wasn't even allowed to complain because, according to my parents, they were already doing enough for me. My sister didn't like my presence in her room. I was only allowed in at night to sleep. Even when I was sick, I had to lie on the couch and not in my room because she was a girl and needed privacy. I desperately longed to turn 18 so I could move out of the house. It seems my family was much more eager to get rid of me. When we were 16, my sister got pregnant by a 19-year-old guy whose parents had kicked him out after he repeated 8th grade 3 times. My parents arranged their marriage and my father got him a job as a cleaner at his factory. My father, who is a mechanic at an automotive company, brought him home. Obviously, I had to move out of my room to make space for him. But our house only had 2 bedrooms and a tiny space. I asked if I could sleep on the couch, but my father refused, saying that he sleeps on the couch when my mother's snoring becomes unbearable on winter nights. They told me to find a place for myself, which worsened my situation. My loser brother-in-law used to say, "Buddy, it's not hard to find a place for yourself." My parents kicked me out when I was 15, and I still managed to rebuild my life. Now I have a family. Trust me, things will get better out there. I sighed. Yeah, if living like a junkie means rebuilding life, and getting a minor pregnant means having a family for you, then sure. Most of my relatives lived far away, and besides, my parents threatened me not to show up at any of my relatives' houses because that would mean exposing my parents' toxicity. I asked some friends to lend me their couch to sleep on, but I had no luck. However, one of my classmates lived in a garage. He let me stay for a few months until his parents saw me there and kicked me out too. I slept on a bench in La Serra for a few days until the police found me and took me back home. My parents made up the story that I had run away from home. That night they took me in again. My father got an improvised tent from a scrapyard and told me to use the backyard to set up my place. It was a reward for keeping quiet in front of the police and obeying their order not to show up at my relatives' houses. The tent was still safer than sleeping outdoors. Summer was fine, but winter was terrible. One day it was so cold that I felt like I was going to freeze to death. I knocked on the door of my house, but no one answered. I desperately needed help. I knocked on my parents' bedroom window. My father shouted from inside not to bother him, or he'd come out and knock me down. I felt so miserable that, for a moment, I wanted to die. I cried all night. The next day, I looked for a job that would provide me with a place to sleep. A bakery needed a worker for its factory, which was about 20 kilometers away. But they agreed to give me a place to sleep and even offered me food. They basically baked at home and needed an extra hand. They offered me the back room to live in, but I had to clean it first. I accepted. The place was pretty messy, with flour and sugar everywhere, not to mention the rodents that survived with them. But I was at the lowest point in my life, so I gladly took that job. I packed my things and left. Even my sister was happy and said, "Good thing you're leaving, we have no space for you here." They didn't even bother asking me where I was going. I cleaned the place and made it livable. At first it was hard to get rid of the rodents when they came looking for food, but eventually I got comfortable living there. I had to drop out of high school. There were only a few months left until the final exams of my senior year. My friends told me to continue living in my parents' backyard and finish high school, but I had already given up. I worked hard at my job and lived off my salary. Soon I realized I needed to improve my skills to get a better job. I learned some skills. My dad is a mechanic, so I grew up playing with his toolbox. I worked for my parents. They didn't have to buy me toys. I also helped my dad with the plumbing at the house. I saved up, took a course, and got a job at an automotive plant. I worked hard to climb up in the company. Now I'm a supervisor. Recently, one of my old friends was urgently selling his house. He had divorce problems and needed an immediate buyer. I hesitated to buy a 3-bedroom house, but he offered me a great discount below market price and agreed to accept the down payment in installments. I took the deal. 2 weeks ago, I moved into my new house, and today I found unexpected guests at my door. Yes, my parents, my sister, and my brother-in-law. It was a surprise to me because I hadn't been in contact with them all these years. They hadn't even communicated with me. This house of mine is almost 25 kilometers from their house, so they wouldn't have gotten here by accident. I'm not in contact with any of my relatives, neither in person nor on social media. But I guess it was the neighbor. I'm still friends with one of my neighbors. Maybe he saw photos of my house on Facebook and told my parents. I still have no idea how they discovered my exact address. My dad knew where I worked, so maybe he got the address from there. As soon as I opened the door, they barged into my house. Mom and Dad congratulated me and said they were proud of me. I smiled and offered them a chair. I still don't have much furniture. I only have a bed, some chairs, and a table. My parents sat down and started asking me about buying the house. They found it incredible that I could buy a house at this age while they were still renting. My sister and her lazy husband wandered around my house as if they were planning to move in. I asked them, "What's going on?" Why did you suddenly show up in my life? They said nothing. They just said they were checking on me. Funny, right? They checked on me when I needed them the least. They started giving me updates about their lives. Dad developed hypertension. My sister has 3 kids, 14, 9, and 4 years old, and she's pregnant again. Good for her, I guess. I just sat there nodding and wondering if I should yell at them or kindly ask them to leave. Mom asked me if I was going to get married or if I had a girlfriend. I said, "It's none of your business." She replied, "Why are you so grumpy? Is everything okay?" I answered, "Everything was fine until you showed up." She laughed and said that if moving into a new house overwhelmed me, she could lend a hand. At that moment, my sister came in and said, "I've decided that we're going to take that bedroom with the balcony and attached bath. I'm excited to finally have my own bathroom. The kids can have the other room." I got angry and said, "What the hell is going on here?" My sister said, "You have a 3-bedroom house and you're single. You don't need that much space. You used to live in a tent, so having a bedroom is a huge improvement for you. This house is so big that I can accommodate all of us." Before continuing with the story, remember to subscribe for a new video every day. My parents interrupted her and asked her to take care of her youngest child who was crying for attention. I looked at my parents and asked, "What the hell did you just say?" Dad told me that it was hard to fit 7 heads in a small house. My sister's oldest son, 14 years old, was sleeping on the couch, while the middle one slept with my parents and the youngest with my sister. Also, she's pregnant again, so they need a big house. Mom said, "And you know that now you have a big house, you can't host your sister with you." Before she finished her sentence, I shouted, "No way, I'm not going to bring anyone into my house." My sister yelled at me that I owed her this for bringing me into the world, as always. "Mom and Dad would never have had you if it weren't for me. You owe me a place here. That house has become so overcrowded that I can't even breathe." I replied, "Yeah, thanks to you for bringing me into this world. Now everyone out." Before anyone could say anything, I told them to leave my house immediately. Dad tried to use his tough tone, raised his voice, and said that it was my duty as the man of the house to take care of my sister. I yelled back that I had no obligation to take care of my sister, but as parents, they had the obligation to take care of me. They hesitated. Now he was fine with his grandson sleeping on the couch, but when I asked, he refused and kicked me out of the house. I ranted about how I survived with rodents in my employer's garage and how I had been living in a gloomy apartment for a decade, but none of them came to see me. My mom began to sob and tried to hug me. I blocked her and told them to leave. My brother-in-law said, "Act like a man, brother. I've lived that life for many years too. I never complained. You have such a big house. You're single. What are you going to do with all that space?" I motioned for him to shut up. My sister began insulting me for treating her husband that way. I said, "Then get out if you don't want me to knock him down." I kicked them out of my house without letting them say a word. I'm burning with rage. They were always toxic and narcissistic, and now they've become greedy. But I'm not 16 anymore to follow their orders like a puppet. If they bother me again, I won't hesitate to call the police. Update 1. My problematic sister and her troublesome husband burst into my house. By the way, some of you asked in the comments if my sister offered to pay the rent. The answer is a resounding no. She hasn't and can't afford the rent. She and her husband are moochers and baby-making machines. They've been multiplying in my parents' house for 12 years, and now they want to do it with me. It's not that my parents are happy to support her. I saw the frustration in their eyes the last time they visited me. Instead of simply kicking her out, they're offloading those lazy people onto my shoulders. A week after the first encounter with them, my mom showed up at my house again. This time, she didn't beat around the bush and told me that I should let my guard down and allow my sister to move in with me. I told her absolutely not. Basically, she repeated the same things. About how difficult it was to accommodate so many people in a small house, blah blah. Still, My answer was no. Then she changed tactics and tried to threaten me. I should have picked up on the hint immediately. She said, "Look, honey, you live alone in this big house and you're out for 12 hours a day. What happens if someone breaks into your house? If a family lives here, it would be much safer for you. Plus, you'd have help cleaning the house, washing the dishes, and doing the laundry." I told her, one last time, no, and that she should leave. "I don't want any of you in my house." Just a few days later, one of my neighbors told me he saw a pregnant woman with a man and a small child prowling around my premises. They were looking from the window, wandering around the backyard, and it seemed they were trying to sneak in. He's an elderly man who sits on his front porch all afternoon. When they noticed my neighbor watching them, they left. He came to inform me as a gesture of goodwill. I thanked him and gave him my number, asking him to call me if he sees them again. My house wasn't protected by cameras. I planned to install them over the weekend. Who would have thought they'd break in before then? Just 2 days later, I received a call from that elderly neighbor saying he suspected someone had entered my house. I rushed home in a panic. He was right. My sister and my brother-in-law had entered through the back window. She said, "We had no other choice than this. You were being an idiot and wouldn't let us. Now we live here and you deal with it." I mean, to what extent was she rubbing her right in my face? My brother-in-law came out of the room where they had set up their bedroom. He said, "It was pretty easy, wasn't it?" Without a second thought, I lunged toward my sister-in-law. My sister stepped in and pushed her aside. I punched her in the face. Her 14-year-old son attacked me with a bottle and started making my head bleed. The blow wasn't severe and I was coherent, though I was on the verge of fainting. But anger kept me alert. Everyone panicked when they saw the blood. My sister called my parents and told them what had happened. My brother-in-law and his son began cleaning up the mess. My neighbor called the police. My sister and my brother-in-law started apologizing and begged me to forgive their son so he wouldn't be arrested. I told them that all of them would go to jail with him. The police arrived and took my statement. My sister denied all accusations of breaking in and assaulting me. She said she was visiting my house with her family, that her son had made a joke and accidentally caused me to slip and hurt my head. She claimed she was furious with me and that was why I was falsely accusing them. What a liar. Meanwhile, my parents arrived and forced me to drop the charges against them. They all banded together to prove that I was a liar, saying I was using the police to get revenge on my sister. Thank God, my neighbor intervened and gave his statement, and based on that, the police arrested them. They had to spend the night behind bars because my parents didn't have the money to bail them out, while their children were left in my parents' care. The next day, they were brought to trial. I went to the hospital and got my wounds treated. The doctor checked for internal injuries. I had to take a couple of days off to rest. I pressed charges for assault against them and also claimed compensation for what they had broken. The court agreed that they should pay for it. Meanwhile, my parents tried every possible way to get me to drop the charges, but I threatened to sue them for planning the attack against me. Their son is a minor, so he was processed under juvenile law. He spent a week in a juvenile facility, and their parents will have to pay for restitution, lost wages, and medical bills. My sister and my brother-in-law were fined heavily, but they pleaded to serve part of their sentence as community service. It's been a week since then, and silence has reigned. I hope they've learned their lesson and stay away from me. Update 2. It seems my parents still won't leave me alone. Yesterday they showed up at my house again. I slammed the door in their faces. They stood outside for almost an hour, begging me to listen to them. Finally, I had to let them in. I wish I could have shouted at them from the window and threatened them like Dad did to me 12 years ago. Anyway, I asked them why they were at my door again. They both started sobbing and said they needed my help. I told them, if this has anything to do with my sister, then count me out. They said it was about them. Dad said, "You see, I'm getting older and I feel fragile. I can't work like I used to. Our house hasn't been fixed in years, Everything is falling apart. I interrupted and said, get to the point. They wanted to move in with me. As a responsible son, I should take them in. I should have done it if they were responsible parents, but they weren't. I asked what would happen to their house and if they were going to cancel the lease. They said they would give that house to my sister. I said, oh, great, you found another way to exploit me. First, they tried to dump my sister on me. That plan failed. Now they want to load me one last time. My house isn't available for anyone. They said my sister was willing to pay me rent for living in my house, which I could use to pay the mortgage. I said, I don't need her rent. She doesn't have to worry about my mortgage problems. She should take care of herself. Mom started crying, saying that my sister was having a really hard time making ends meet. She can't even sleep well because her kids share the same room. I said, it's not my problem if she's being used like a dairy cow. They said, what can we say? You disagree with everything. You don't want to take in your sister, and you don't agree with us. At least let us move in with you. The house is too big for a single man. I said, I don't plan to stay single forever. They tried to emotionally manipulate me by saying I should take care of my elderly parents. I shouted, karma is real. Remember how you kicked me out of the house? This is what life gives you. I opened the door for them to leave with bitter faces. I don't care what they call me, but I'm not going to be a doormat and give in to their demands. Update 3. I'd like to say that my life is normal and quiet, like anyone else's. But with parents and a sister like these, it's impossible to give a normal update. So here's what they did this time. After the last time my parents asked for the house for themselves, they came up with a new idea. Even more delusional than the previous ones. They proposed that I build a house in the back for them. You see, the house has a relatively large yard and you could build a small guest house. So my parents, knowing I don't want any of them moving into my house, want me to build a little house for the two of them in the backyard. At least this time they offered to help with the expenses, which is considerate. They wanted to chip in about $5,000 to build the house. I don't think they have any idea what it costs to build one. That won't even cover the materials. I told them I thought it was an excellent idea. They just had to wait until I found my invisible checkbook to write them an invisible check, and for my dad to go get the materials. My mom said there was no need to be sarcastic, since the idea was quite reasonable. How can that be reasonable? Or what kind of people find this reasonable? Well, maybe it's reasonable for the kind of parents who make their son sleep in a tent in the backyard. So my response was that I might accept them, only if they agreed to live in the backyard in a tent like the one I used for a long time. My mom said that was fine for a young person, because he can handle that better, but that an older woman like her can't stand the cold anymore. And my dad said he wouldn't have a place to sleep anywhere else if my mom snores too loudly at night. I replied that that was my final offer, and if they liked it they could accept it. If not, although I really enjoy their visits because they're entertaining and funny, I prefer to live a normal life and have them stop visiting me with increasingly stupid ideas. My mom didn't like that very much, because she realized I was messing with them. But I was already slamming the door in their faces before any more nonsense could come out of their mouths. We'll see what other idea they come up with next. Update 4. It's been 7 months and I haven't heard from my parents or my sister. So I wanted to give an update. Everything has been silent since then, which I find quite strange. I guess they've found some solution to their problem. I'd be lying if I said I'm not curious about what happened, but I'm not going to contact them. I'm not going to unleash the Kraken. Their neighbor, who is a friend of mine, has moved, so he doesn't know anything about them. So this is my update, telling you that now I have a normal life. It feels bad to bring you an update with nothing new, but it feels good to live a life without their drama. My parents didn't pay for my college, and now they want me to lend them money to pay for my sister's wedding. But I reminded them how they were against borrowing when I needed it. I'm 34 years old and work as a software developer. Compared to the rest of my family, I earn a lot more money. My mom is a retired music teacher, and my dad runs a local hardware store. I also have a younger sister, Catherine, who's 30, and I haven't been in touch with her for the past 5 years. Mainly because she's a horrible person, spoiled and coddled since childhood, and my parents never did anything to curb that. I put up with her for a long time, but 5 years ago she brought her new boyfriend to our Christmas dinner. I was hosting that year. I had just moved into a new apartment and wanted to do something special. But, as always, Catherine ruined the whole party by making unnecessary comments about how small and outdated my place was, and that it wasn't even in a good neighborhood. She wouldn't stop bragging about her new boyfriend, who turned out to be pretty rich and lived in a mansion that was more than 10 times the size of my apartment. I couldn't stand it, so I told her that, unlike her boyfriend, I had moved into this apartment on my own and was paying the entire rent by myself, something she and her boyfriend couldn't say. I also told her that if her standards were so high, she should get out of my house and never come back. Naturally, she and her boyfriend were offended, because it was all true, and they left. Since then, we haven't been in touch, and my parents have made a lot of efforts to reconcile us. But I don't want anything to do with her. Fast forward to recently, I found out that she got engaged to that same guy from 5 years ago, and they're set to get married in a few months. My parents, like fools, insisted on covering the cost of the venue and the wedding decorations because they didn't want to look bad compared to the groom's parents. I think that was a pretty stupid move on their part because, first of all, they should have known that their daughter has expensive tastes and that the wedding would be way over their budget. Secondly, there was literally no way to compete with the groom's parents, who are much more financially stable than our family. I don't even know what they were thinking, but the engagement was already on, and the wedding was only months away, at least according to my sister's plans. My parents eventually realized they couldn't afford it, since my sister's wedding plans were way out of their budget. A few days ago, they came to me asking for a loan. Even though we've had a decent relationship over the past few years, I had to turn them down because of something that happened years ago. The reason I'm on Reddit asking if I did the right thing is that many relatives have told me I'm being stingy, and I really don't believe I am. When I was about to graduate high school and start college, my parents told me they wouldn't cover my tuition or any other expenses because, once I turned 18, I was on my own. I was a bit surprised because they'd always been very supportive, so it seemed out of character. But they explained that in their day, once you hit 18, you had to fend for yourself since their parents couldn't afford to cover their expenses once they became adults. Apparently, that made them very strong and independent, and they wanted me to do the same. They hadn't even set aside any money for my sister or me. They expected us to work through college, just like they did. My major wasn't easy, and I really didn't want to waste my time working while studying because I wasn't sure I could keep up my grades. College isn't cheap. It's pretty expensive, so no amount of effort would have been enough. I suggested that maybe we could take out a student loan for me, but my parents disagreed. Even when I proposed that we could borrow money from some relatives and pay them back later, they said it was insulting just to suggest it. They said asking for money was against their principles because it was pathetic. I remember having many arguments with them about this very issue. In the end, I managed to get my grandparents to help me secure a student loan, and that's how I graduated. I was really angry with my parents at that time for this whole thing. But that doesn't mean I've completely forgotten it. My sister never had that problem because she never even went to college. She figured she didn't need to worry about it since she knew she'd eventually take over dad's business or just get married. And that's exactly what she's doing. So, good for her. Anyway, the point is, I remember what my parents said about borrowing money when I mentioned that we could have taken out a loan for my college expenses. They said no because it went against their principles. So now, according to those same principles, they should still be against borrowing money. When it came to my college funds, all they cared about were their principles. But now that Catherine wants to get married and have a big wedding, suddenly they've forgotten all about that. I thought it was very convenient for them, and I wasn't going to let it slide after all the trouble they caused me back then. I really don't believe that my sister's wedding is more important than my college education. If I hadn't been able to finish my degree and get the grades I did, I probably wouldn't have this job, and I might not even be in a position to help them financially. So when they came to me for help, I reminded them what they had told me about loans and borrowing money, and how it went against their principles. They were a bit stunned. I don't think they expected me to remember all that even after all these years, but I remembered it quite well. After I talked to them, they had nothing to say and just went home in silence. I thought that would be the end of it, but then a bunch of relatives started contacting me, saying that the way I treated my parents was extremely humiliating for them and that they were very upset. Apparently, my parents had told everyone that I changed after making so much money, and now I was paying them back by putting them in their place, trying to look down on them even after everything they had done for me. I don't think that's an accurate representation of what I did at all. I was simply fighting against something that seemed unfair to me. And that was it. So I ended up not speaking to my parents at all, because if they really had a problem with what I said, they should have confronted me right then and there instead of going behind my back and complaining to the rest of the family. I didn't even talk to the rest of the family because if they didn't understand where I was coming from, I had nothing more to say to them anyway. It's not like I was invited to my sister's wedding, so I didn't think I needed to contribute in any way. Over the last few days, I haven't had any contact with my parents or anyone else in the family, and I've been pretty content with that because I don't believe I did anything wrong. But 2 days ago, my parents visited me again, and this time they were very upset. They told me that, apparently because of me, they had been uninvited from my sister's wedding. I don't understand how I could have done something like that, as I haven't been in touch with Catherine at all. But they said that when they told her they couldn't finance the wedding and that they needed some help from her and her in-laws to cover the costs they couldn't pay, she lost it and started pressuring them to somehow get the money. At that point, if she were to ask her in-laws for financial help, it would make her family look really bad, and she didn't want that. She had a point, because if my parents weren't sure they could cover the entire cost of what they'd promised, they shouldn't have committed in the first place. Normally, Catherine is very spoiled and has a sense of superiority, but I don't think she was wrong in what she said here. Personally, I believe that she and her fiancé should have covered the entire cost between themselves, since her family is rich enough to pay for it. But if my parents have committed to something, they should follow through, and she has a point that they're making her look bad in front of her in-laws. I'd say she had every right to be angry, and I told my parents that I wasn't involved in any of it because I never told them to commit to something like that. They brought it on themselves, especially since they didn't have anyone else to blame for it, a part of it being their own fault. At this point, I would definitely say that completely uninviting them from the wedding was an overreaction on my sister's part, but then again, what did you expect? Catering has always been like that, and they're responsible for it, not me. However, my parents just weren't ready to listen and kept insisting that if I had just helped them out and lent them some money instead of being so stingy and harboring old grudges, they wouldn't be in this situation right now. It seemed very unfair to me that they were blaming me, so I asked them to leave, and they did. But they kept badgering me, and now the entire family has turned against me, accusing me of being a selfish and cold-hearted person. Personally, I don't think I did anything wrong, but anyway, I'm now seen as the bad guy simply because I refused to contribute to my sister's wedding since my parents can't pay for it. But before we continue, don't forget to subscribe, new stories every day. Update 1. So I've decided to cut off all contact with my entire family. The crazy thing is that both my dad's side and my mom's side are united against me right now, except my grandparents. Obviously, my maternal grandparents are no longer around, but my dad's side is on my side. They've even been trying to keep the peace in the family, but even they are getting tired of all this drama. Everyone in the family has had their differences in the past, but I guess their hatred toward me has brought them together. At least I'm glad I managed to do something right for the family, but now I've blocked everyone, and I really don't want any drama at the moment. Someone in the comments suggested that maybe the real reason everyone seems to hate me so much, and needs a reason to be against me, is probably because they're jealous, and I think that's a pretty valid point. I don't mean to brag, but I'm a lot better off than most people in my family, and I don't think they could ever handle that. I never followed anyone else's advice growing up, even though most people told me to just get a business degree and take over my dad's business because that was supposed to be the future instead of always being stuck in front of a computer. And guess what? That's exactly how I make my living now. The fact is, I'm much more successful than most of my cousins, and not only are they jealous of me, but their parents also seem to resent me. It just doesn't make any sense because I believe families should be happy for each other's successes and share in that joy, but that's never been the case. Sometimes it really saddens me, but I can't help it. Some people are just like that. I bet my parents are already enjoying that everyone is against me right now, because according to them, I'm the one who uninvited them from my sister's wedding. We haven't spoken since they came by last time to accuse me of ruining their relationship with my sister, which I still don't understand. My grandparents told me they aren't talking to them either, since my grandparents are on my side, which just shows how ungrateful they really are. My grandparents have helped them countless times in the past, yet they still don't seem to remember any of it. That actually makes me pretty happy, because I'm convinced that if I had helped them when they came to me, they would have conveniently forgotten about it later. They take everything for granted, and it's high time someone gave them a lesson, even if that someone has to be as terrible as Catherine. Update 2. Yesterday, something really odd happened. I was super busy and couldn't share it here, but Catherine came by after I got home from work. She arrived at my place about an hour later, and I was really surprised, because, as I mentioned, I haven't spoken to her in the last 5 years and we're not on good terms. I was pretty sure she was there to talk about her wedding, since now that our parents aren't even invited, I figured she needed money. But she was smart enough not to start with that. Instead, she said she was there to apologize for everything she did in the past. She explained that she was about to start a new chapter in her life by getting married and wanted to extend a formal invitation to me before anyone else to make up for her previous behavior. She claimed that she really regretted being a spoiled kid, but it wasn't entirely her fault because our parents never corrected her behavior either. She grew up believing that what she was doing was normal and acceptable, but now that she's older, she realizes she was a terrible person and is trying to make amends with everyone she hurt. She thought there was no one better than me to start with, since, as her brother, I had to put up with her more than anyone else. I let her speak, and once she finished her little speech, I told her I was okay with it and that I was glad she'd finally come to her senses and apologized. But I knew there was more coming, and I waited patiently. Sure enough, she then started telling me that she knew our parents had also been horrible to me, because she'd heard from other relatives that I was selfish, cold-hearted, and stingy just because I refused to contribute to her wedding. She even tried to flatter me, saying I was totally right in what I'd said, since at the end of the day, they never helped me once I turned 18 and were the ones who had committed to helping her pay for the wedding. So it wasn't my responsibility to bail them out when they were in trouble, especially considering that we never had a good relationship in the first place. I could tell she was gearing up to ask for something, so I just waited until she finally said it. After a while of silence, she finally told me that now that our parents were no longer invited, they had pulled the funds they'd promised for a long time. She went off about how unfair that was, because they were the ones who said they'd cover at least some of the costs, and now she was too embarrassed to go to her fiancé and tell him that, after the fight with their parents, nothing would be covered and that he'd have to pay for everything. So she was here to ask if I'd be willing to help her out in this tough time, just this one time, and that she'd be grateful for it. She even said she was willing to sign a contract or whatever was necessary to prove she'd pay me back eventually, hopefully by the end of the year. But she just needed my help right then to save her from having to explain everything to her fiancé. I thought it was interesting that she was willing to promise to pay back the money. even going as far as involving legal documents to make it official. But I told her I needed time to think about it. In the end, even though she'd apologized, we're still not on good terms, and our relationship remains very tense. I figured she'd understand, but it turned out she was pretty shameless and said I was being really stingy and that it wasn't much to ask for from her own brother. That was pretty ironic coming from her, since in the past 5 years we haven't had any kind of relationship, not even a sisterly one. I knew from the start that she was only here to ask for money, not to apologize. I told her she was just like our parents, selfish and always looking out for themselves. Obviously, she got mad at me after that and started yelling, but I'm not my parents. I wasn't going to put up with that. I immediately told her to leave my house because I wasn't going to tolerate that kind of behavior. At first, she refused to go, so I grabbed her arm and pulled her out. She kept saying she was going to call the police for assaulting her, but I didn't care. Eventually, she left. I was pretty upset for a while, but now this is just a stupidly funny incident to me, and I'm not going to let it affect me. Update 3. It's been a couple of weeks since my last update, and I just assumed that since my sister and I were at odds, the invitation she had given me was revoked. But today I was pleasantly surprised to receive an invitation to her wedding. I wasn't sure how to take it, so I decided to reach out to her. At first, she didn't respond, but about an hour later she finally called me back. On the phone, she was pretty brief when I thanked her for inviting me, so I asked what was really going on because I was confused. She told me that that day she wanted to apologize and that she was really trying to be a better person. She also said that she'd managed to secure the money on her own, so she didn't need anyone's help anymore. But she wanted me to know that she wasn't just apologizing to win me over for my money. She truly meant every word she'd said that day. She also mentioned that our parents actually made her realize just how spoiled she had been in the past, and now she's doing her best not to become like them. At that point, I asked if she was planning on inviting our parents too, and she said that, contrary to what people are saying, she never really uninvited them. Instead, they put themselves in a really difficult position. Apparently, our parents had been warned from the start about the extravagant wedding plans she had, and they were told that they probably wouldn't have enough to cover everything. But they were overly confident about it. After talking so big, it would have been pretty embarrassing for her to tell her fiancé that her parents could only talk big and couldn't actually pay what they promised. What really upset her was that they didn't even bother to think things through, and they were so determined to compete with her in-laws that, after she ended up yelling at them, they decided on their own that they no longer wanted to be part of her wedding. They never even had it out with her, but they came to that conclusion on their own, and now they're doing exactly the same thing to me instead of confronting her directly. They've been talking to everyone about it. I have to admit, it's really twisted that they're telling people their kids are so awful when they don't even try to clear things up with us when they have the chance. Of course, after saying such horrible things about us to everyone else, we're not exactly eager to patch things up with them. And yet, they always find a way to blame us. They just love playing the victim. I'm glad that my sister is finally seeing that for herself. Catherine told me that the rest of the family hasn't completely cut her off like they did with me, but she's still debating whether to invite them because they seem pretty certain to side with our parents. With me, they were really mean, but with her, most of them still tried to explain why our parents were right instead of directly accusing her of anything. I suspect it might have something to do with our parents being too proud to apologize but not too proud to live off their children in the future. And since our grandparents aren't going to help them anymore, at least they need Catherine on their side to keep that door open. That's just my theory, though I'm not sure what's really going on. What I do know is that they're treating Catherine very differently from how they treated me, and it's sad, but it's not something I'm not used to. At least Catherine is starting to see the truth now, and if she's really trying to be a better person, I think I'm willing to give her a chance. After we talked on the phone, she apologized for causing a scene the other day and said she'd really be happy to have me at the wedding, because at least one family member should be there. I still haven't decided whether I want to go or not, but I'm going to wait a few days before getting back to her about attending. It's not easy to fix a relationship that's been broken for 5 years, but I also don't want to be the type of person who holds grudges forever. Life would be miserable if that were the case. I even talked it over with our grandparents, and they said if I decide to go, they'd attend as well. They weren't sure about going before, but given the current circumstances, they might, since it looks like Catherine is reconsidering her relationship with the rest of the family and might not invite them. Update 4. Yesterday I was at Catherine's wedding, or rather, I attended because I walked her down the aisle. Unfortunately, our parents never apologized to her or even reached out before the wedding, which is why they weren't invited. She was really upset about that for a couple of days before the ceremony and contacted me to ask if I'd be willing to walk her down the aisle, as she needed someone there for immediate emotional support. I agreed, because no matter what happened in the past, no one deserves to be treated like that, especially not by their own parents over some trivial fight. I've always known it would be much easier for our parents to distance themselves from me, since my sister was always the golden child. But witnessing this side of them made me realize they were too proud and selfish to even try to mend their relationship with the only daughter who ever really mattered to them. That was just beneath them. They're partly the reason Catherine turned out the way she did in the past. Nobody ever bothered to correct her behavior as parents, which should have been their responsibility. They never seemed to care about how she acted and always thought it was a good idea to let her be, which ultimately spoiled her. I'm not saying it's entirely her fault, but they could have done something to prevent it, and they didn't. When Catherine asked me to walk her down the aisle, I said yes. She genuinely seemed grateful because even the few family members she invited ended up declining. I guess everyone wants to support our parents and be part of the drama. However, I managed to convince our grandparents to attend, and she apologized to everyone before the ceremony. Her fiancé even apologized to me for how he treated me all those years ago. Catherine told me she had laid out the whole truth to her fiancé about our parents, and he said not to worry about the money. He'd take care of everything. That's how things worked out for them. She nearly broke down before the ceremony because our parents wouldn't be there, but her fiancé, our grandparents, and I reassured her not to let them ruin such a special day. I wouldn't say everything's perfect now, but we're working on it and trying to make things better in the future. I truly believe she's changed, and when I saw her yesterday, I felt she was sincere about wanting a fresh start. Some people might not agree with my decision, but I think I'm doing the right thing. Update 5. I'm back after more than a year, or maybe even 2. I can't quite recall my last update, but I have some really good news about my sister. She became a mom a month ago. She had her daughter. Thinking back on everything we went through with our parents at her wedding, I remembered this post. Neither of us has spoken to our parents since. They haven't even met their granddaughter. The only ones who have gone to see her are our grandparents, who are now great-grandparents. I wish this were a happy update in the sense that things have improved with our parents, but they haven't. We've made peace with the fact that our parents aren't in our lives, and that's how we live now. I don't even think an apology from them would help at this point, because over all this time they haven't even tried to come close to fixing things. But it's okay. Some people grow up without parents and still do just fine. When it comes time for me to be a parent, I'll definitely take everything I experienced with them into account and use it to be a better father. I think that's the least I owe my future children, and my niece, as her uncle.
My dad refused to walk me down the aisle because his golden child had a housewarming party that day, but he called me in a panic when I found someone to replace him. For a long time, I always knew my parents loved my older sister, Vicky, more than they loved me. She was the planned child, while I was the result of an accidental pregnancy just 10 months later. They probably didn't even want me, but they decided to go ahead with the pregnancy anyway. My mom's parents had passed away before I was born, but my dad's parents were very much alive, so they played a significant role in raising me. Grandma and grandpa were constants in my life, providing the love and support I often felt was missing from my own parents. I remember so many times when my parents would leave me with my grandparents and only take my sister on trips. When I was little, I didn't mind because living with my grandparents was fun. But as I got older, around 6 or 7 years old, I realized how unfair it all was. But my issues weren't just with my parents, they were with my sister, Vicky, too. Even though I didn't hold any grudge against her, I couldn't help feeling like an unwanted extra in the family. She knew it too, and she made me feel like an outsider every day in my own home. She was always competing with me over everything, grades, our parents' attention, even the smallest achievements. It felt like a constant battle for validation, and I was always on the losing side because our parents always preferred her. As a result, I felt incredibly inferior, and we never really understood each other. Our relationship was like an endless competition, with her always coming out on top. Once, she wanted to be friends with a group of girls, but being a bit of a nerd, she was scared to approach them. One of the girls and I had art class together, so she introduced me to the rest of the group and we used to hang out together. Vicky was so jealous of that she got our parents to talk to me about including her. On top of that, whenever she was with them, she would start picking fights, but my mom called me selfish while my dad said she was my sister and that I should look out for her. Reluctantly, I agreed and introduced Vicky to the other girls. Now, Vicky didn't have many friends, so she could come off as overly enthusiastic. She constantly tried to impress the girls in our group, which often ended up being annoying. Despite her efforts, she had a hard time finding her place among them, and the awkward tension between Vicky and the other girls was always palpable. For example, one of the girls liked a guy, so Vicky took it upon herself to go over and tell him that the girl liked him. He laughed because he wasn't interested and then went around telling everyone, which embarrassed the girl. After that, the girls told me outright that they didn't want me to bring Vicky around at our hangouts. So I agreed, but Vicky wouldn't accept that. She threw a tantrum when she found out that the girls didn't want anything to do with her and insisted to our parents that I shouldn't hang out with these mean girls, either, since as her sister I should stand up for her. I refused and told her it was her own fault for not being someone they wanted to be friends with. But, as always, our parents sided with her. They lectured me about how Vicky didn't mean any harm, that I should try to convince the girls to forgive her, but if they wouldn't, then I should also stay away from them. I refused and stood my ground. I enjoyed hanging out with them, and unlike Vicky, I wasn't willing to jeopardize my friendships. I told my parents I'd had enough and that it wasn't my responsibility to find friends for Vicky. My parents got mad and gave me the silent treatment for weeks. But I'm glad I stood firm. That group of girls has remained my friends to this day, and they're basically like sisters to me. I've cried with them, laughed with them, and shared some of the most meaningful moments of my life. That wasn't the only reason Vicky came to hate me. There was another incident with a guy she was infatuated with. A guy the first knew nothing about, who sat with me in some classes because we were friends. He tried to ask me to prom, but I politely declined because I was already going with someone I liked. Later, when Vicky found out, she made a huge scene about it, telling our parents that I always took the things she wanted and that I flirted with the guy even though she had been into him for months. She called me a bunch of ugly names that no one should ever say to their own sister and told our parents that she wished I wasn't her sister. My mom took her side, telling me that what I did was wrong and that as a sister I should respect the girl code. I tried to explain that I wasn't even interested in the guy and had rejected his invitation, so she was free to ask him if she wanted, but Vicky wouldn't let it go. Looking back, I think she knew the guy would have rejected her anyway, so she just wanted to get back at me for being asked instead of her. Once, my dad took me out for ice cream, saying he wanted some father-daughter time with me. This had never happened before, so I was really happy. However, he started asking me a lot of questions, as if my boyfriend and I were being careful, if he came from a good family, or if we were doing drugs. I was shocked by his line of questioning and asked what he meant by it. That's when my dad revealed that Vicky had been making up stories, telling our parents for months that I was using drugs and drinking alcohol with my boyfriend. This was a complete lie, and I showed my dad my phone so he could see that Vicky was lying. Later, when my dad confronted her about all the lies, she tried to justify herself by saying that no one our age just hangs out with a guy and that I was clearly hiding things from everyone. I got so angry that I yelled at her for trying to create unnecessary drama and told her it wasn't my fault she had no one to go out with, but that she needed to stay out of my life. Vicky wouldn't accept that and ended up hitting me. It happened out of nowhere. She had never been physically violent before. My nose started bleeding as I fell to the ground, clutching my face in pain. My parents rushed me to the hospital, and the entire time they begged me not to press charges against Vicky. They said it would ruin her life, while I was sitting in the back seat, holding my face. Vicky didn't even care or apologize. Later, when the nurse asked me about the incident, I told her the truth, and she ended up calling Child Protective Services. My parents were furious with me for involving CPS, seeing it as a betrayal of family loyalty. In their eyes, Vicky's actions were dismissed as a mere accident, an isolated incident that didn't justify such drastic intervention. They pleaded with the authorities, insisting that Vicky wasn't dangerous to me and that her actions were completely out of character. In the end, Vicky was released, but our parents were warned that they'd be keeping a close eye on our situation in case something else happened. As you can imagine, Vicky was really affected, and so were my parents. Later on, my parents told me they were disappointed in me for trying to ruin my sister's life. My mom started crying and said I was tearing the family apart by involving outsiders, while my dad's disappointment was palpable as he loaded his words with reproach, questioning my decision to escalate the situation. I told them firmly that I wanted Vicky out of my life, and they agreed. I felt guilty for involving the authorities, but for the first time, I felt safe in my own home. Once Vicky had been formally warned, my parents had a separate talk with her, and from that day on, she stopped talking to me altogether. I prefer that over having her constantly hovering around or trying to insert herself into my life. When my grandparents found out about the incident, they asked me to pack my things so I could live with them for the rest of high school. They informed my parents, who didn't protest much, so I went to live with my grandparents. Unlike my parents' home, I felt safe and loved there. The rest of my high school years went well, and I made lasting memories with my friends. My parents never visited or called me during that time. I knew they were happy with their beloved daughter, so I never tried to contact them, even though it hurt that they could dismiss me so easily. When I graduated high school, my parents made the day all about Vicky. They didn't even congratulate me or come near me. I felt like a stranger to them. However, my grandparents were there and scolded my parents for being so blatantly biased. I don't know what my grandpa said, but later my dad awkwardly came over and congratulated me. Soon after, I found out I had been accepted into a good college with a full scholarship. I was really happy about that because I had feared asking my parents for financial help. I told my grandparents about it, and they took me out to a nice restaurant for dinner. After dinner, my grandma posted photos of me on her Facebook account, writing a long caption about how proud she was of me for being such an outstanding student. Our relatives soon found out and joined in the congratulations. I guess some of them might have contacted my parents, who had no idea about any of this. Instead of being happy, my mom called me the next day to say that Vicky had locked herself in her room, crying because she hadn't been accepted to any college, and that I was deliberately trying to make her feel bad about her grades by talking to all our relatives. She told me it was all my fault. Apparently, Vicky had fallen into depression after the CPS incident, which had caused her grades to drop. I was so incredibly shattered that my own mom blaming me was the last straw. It was the last time I ever spoke to her. My grandparents helped me move into my college dorm. Since my high school boyfriend's college was far away, we had broken up, so I started college single. The breakup was tough, but I was excited to meet new people. That's when I met Rob, and he and I were both freshmen who spent half our days in the library. Rob was unlike anyone I had ever met. He was a calm, studious person, much like me, and we quickly bonded over our shared love of college life. As weeks turned into months, our friendship deepened into something more, and I realized I had developed feelings for Rob that went beyond just friendship. Being an extrovert, I was pretty direct about my feelings, and I was surprised to learn that he felt the same. We started dating, and we've been together for 8 years now. My grandparents have met Rob, and they absolutely adore him. I've met Rob's parents too, and they literally treat me like their own daughter. At times, Rob's mom even confessed that she always wished she had a daughter, so she's thrilled that Rob met someone as wonderful as me. To be honest, this is the first time I've been surrounded by family who appreciate me and don't hold grudges. I've shared stories of my childhood with Rob, and he listens and understands what my relationship with Vicky is like. Over the past 8 years, my parents have barely contacted me, except for an occasional birthday message if they remembered, and that's it. Recently, Rob and I got engaged. He proposed while we were hiking to our usual spot to watch the sunrise. It was a dream proposal. It was so sweet to see how nervous he was when he asked, and I didn't hesitate for a moment when I said yes. I posted engagement photos on Instagram and also told my grandparents. They were so happy for me and congratulated us on our future. I guess the news must have spread because my parents called out of the blue to congratulate me too. I thought it was just a casual conversation since we hadn't spoken in years. They asked about my life, my job, my apartment, until my dad suddenly asked if he could walk me down the aisle. I was surprised by his sudden question since, just moments before, he didn't even know what company I worked for. I told him I hadn't even thought about it yet, and my dad said it would be embarrassing if I didn't invite them, and that others would question us, so it would be better if he walked me down the aisle. I told my parents I wasn't even sure if I'd invite them to my wedding, since we hadn't been in contact, and this upset them. My mom started telling me how disappointed she was with my response, emphasizing the importance of family and tradition. She continued saying that no matter what, I would always be with my parents and that I should let the past go. Part of me was tempted to listen to them and accept my dad's offer, because I wanted our relationship to be repaired, but another part of me hesitated, afraid of opening myself up to more disappointments and hurt. However, I was about to start a new chapter of my life in a few months, so I told my dad that he could walk me down the aisle, and he seemed delighted. During the wedding preparations, I reached out to my high school friends I'd managed to stay in touch with despite the physical distance that had grown between us because of our careers. I told them I wanted the group to get together and that I wanted them to be my bridesmaids. There were many tears of happiness and congratulations, and without hesitation, they agreed to be part of my bridal party. It was a chance for all of us to reunite. We all planned to go to Las Vegas for my bachelorette party, while Rob had a separate bachelor party with his friends. My friends and I posted tons of photos from the party, and overall, everyone had a great time. However, when I got home, my parents called to tell me how disappointed they were that I hadn't invited Vicky to be part of the celebration. I told them there was no way I would ever involve Vicky in my bachelorette party, and that I didn't want her in my life. This surprised my parents, and they asked what I meant by that, so I explained that Vicky's actions, especially her history of lies and gossip, had left me deeply hurt and distrustful of her intentions. I couldn't imagine inviting her to an intimate and joyful occasion like my bachelorette, knowing her presence would dampen the mood. I also told my parents that this was the reason I wasn't inviting her to my wedding either. Upon hearing this, my parents lost it. They complained that I had no right to exclude my sister from my wedding and that as her sister, it was my duty to include her in such important events. They said that Vicky was excited about meeting me after hearing I was getting married. I was confused and asked my parents what gave her that idea, since we hadn't even spoken in a long time. But my parents dismissed my concerns, saying that's just how sisters behave. I told them they needed to understand that my relationship with Vicky is complicated after everything that's happened. I just don't feel comfortable having her as part of my wedding. Not once has she ever apologized for everything she put me through. Still, my parents generally ignored my words. My mom kept saying she wanted everything to be resolved and that I should make an effort to invite Vicky. My dad insisted that our relatives would talk about why my sister wasn't invited, and that it would end up affecting my wedding. However, I knew it was best not to give in to their demands, so I didn't back down. I told them it was fine if people talked behind my back and questioned my character, as long as I was surrounded by people I loved and trusted on my wedding day. My mom then asked if my fiancé would be okay with this, and even tried to bring in his parents' opinion, saying I'd be judged for being so cruel as to exclude my own sister from my wedding. I laughed and told my parents that my fiancé and his parents knew the family dynamic, and neither of them would mind whether Vicky was there or not. They pressured me to reconsider, stressing the importance of family unity and forgiveness, but I didn't budge 1 inch. I wasn't willing to compromise my own well-being just to appease others. In the end, we agreed to disagree, each of us clinging to our own perspectives. My parents told me they needed to think things over, and we ended our conversation there. I told my grandparents about it because I felt a bit guilty for standing up to my parents, and they completely supported me. My grandparents said I shouldn't force myself to invite anyone I didn't want there, and that my parents, as usual, were trying to make me feel guilty. Since that conversation, I've felt a bit better about my decision and have kept busy with the wedding preparations. With my wedding coming up fast, last week my dad called to tell me that he'd thought it over and that he and mom wouldn't be attending the wedding anymore. Before I could react, he continued saying that this also meant he wouldn't walk me down the aisle. I asked if there was a specific reason, and he told me that Vicky was moving into a new place soon, a place our parents had helped her find, and since I was excluding her from the wedding, she had decided to throw a housewarming party on the same day, so they'd be attending that instead of my wedding. I couldn't believe what my dad was telling me. Not only was I not being invited in the first place, but now he wasn't going to walk me down the aisle either. He tried to say that it was his decision not to do it. However, the idea that my own sister's housewarming party was taking precedence over my wedding was a hard blow, a continuation of the feelings I'd had for years. I simply told him I understood and hung up the phone. Even though I tried to act brave in front of my dad, deep down the sting of rejection hurt me. When I told Rob, he was furious at how insensitive our parents could be, especially after they'd insisted on being invited in the first place. It was he who suggested I ask my grandpa, since he and grandma had essentially been there for me more than my parents. I agreed, so I called my grandparents and asked if they'd be willing to walk me down the aisle at my wedding. I couldn't hold it back as I told my grandpa, "You and grandpa have always been there for me," I said, my voice choked with emotion. "You've been more than just grandparents to me. You've been like parents, and I can't imagine anyone else I'd want by my side on my wedding day." My grandpa didn't hesitate for a second before saying yes. He told me how honored he would be to walk me down the aisle, and that unlike my parents, he would never let me down. His words brought me immense comfort, and in that moment, I felt a deep sense of peace. With my grandparents by my side, I knew I had a family that loved me unconditionally and accepted me for who I am, even with all my imperfections. I also spoke with my future father-in-law about this, and Rob's parents assured me they didn't care if my parents didn't attend. They were thrilled to witness and support our union regardless. My wedding is in 2 days, and today I woke up to several missed calls from my dad. I called him back, thinking it was an emergency, and when he answered, he asked if it was true that my grandpa would walk me down the aisle. I told him yes, it was true, and then my dad lost it. He ranted about how disrespectful it was to ask my grandpa. I reminded him that he was the one who decided not to come to my wedding, so I didn't understand why he was so upset. My dad kept yelling about how he and mom were only trying to show me that my actions were wrong and that by declining the invitation they would teach me a lesson. He went on about how he and mom raised me and paid for my food and education, so my grandpa didn't have any right to replace him. I tried to reason with him, explaining that my grandpa had been there for me in ways that he and mom never were, but he refused to listen. He also told me that I'd only pushed everyone away, and that it was all my fault. I don't think I did anything wrong here. I suppose anyone in my situation would have done the same, but since the subreddit requires me to ask, am I the bad person for asking my grandpa to walk me down the aisle instead of my dad? Before continuing, don't forget to subscribe. New stories every day. Update 1. Many people weighed in, and most said I wasn't in the wrong. I've seen plenty of advice and suggestions on how I should handle this situation. I agree that I need to cut off contact with my parents permanently because their constant indecision is exhausting and is starting to affect my mental health. I don't want them in my life when they've consistently shown that Vicky is always their top priority. My parents are selfish, I've known that for a long time. However, how can a daughter simply stop loving her parents? It's much easier said than done, but it's incredibly hard to actually do. Still, for the sake of my peace of mind, I have no choice but to do it so I can enjoy my wedding tomorrow. Update 2. I'm sorry for not updating over the past month, but I've been pretty busy since my wedding. First of all, yes, my wedding was really beautiful, with my grandpa by my side as he walked me down the aisle. Despite my parents being absent, I couldn't be happier exchanging vows with Rob and committing to spend the rest of our lives together. My friends and I danced all night, and I can't begin to express how important it is to stay in touch with your childhood friends, no matter what, because sometimes they become your chosen family. During the reception, I felt a slight pang realizing my parents weren't there to share that special moment, especially when I saw Rob's parents and cousins giving speeches for him. However, I took comfort in knowing I made the right decision for myself by prioritizing my own well-being and happiness. Some of my friends gave heartfelt speeches, sharing memories of our experiences and the bond that carried us through both good times and bad. In the days following the wedding, Rob and I went on our honeymoon, a trip his parents paid for as a wedding gift. I spent my days just relaxing and enjoying time with my husband. I feel so excited every time I look at Rob, knowing that he is now married to me. As I mentioned before, I cut off all contact with my parents by blocking them everywhere. I didn't even bother to send them an explanation because, frankly, they don't deserve it. I have no idea if Vicky really had a housewarming party that day or if it was just an excuse for my parents not to attend my wedding, but at this point, I don't care. I only wish them and their dear daughter the best. Update 3. I wasn't planning on sharing anything more after my last update, but something unexpected just happened, and I think you all deserve to know. I hadn't checked my email for the past month because of my wedding and honeymoon, but today, while going through my inbox, I found an email from Vicky. I have no idea how she got my email address, and I was completely surprised. I hesitated about whether to open her email or just delete it without reading, but as the saying goes, curiosity killed the cat. Inside was a long message from Vicky expressing her regret over our tense relationship and her desire to reconcile. She acknowledged the mistakes she'd made in the past, admitting that she'd been selfish and immature. Vicky apologized for all the pain she caused me over the years and expressed a genuine wish to make things right. She went on to say how happy she was for me now that I'm married, wishing me nothing but the best. She ended the email pleading that I not punish my parents by cutting them out, insisting that they miss me. Reading her words stirred a mix of emotions in me: surprise, skepticism, even a little hope. Part of me wants to believe that Vicky has truly changed, that she's sincere in her apology and willing to work to repair our relationship. But another part of me remains doubtful because it all sounds too good to be true. Besides, one thing is for sure. My parents don't miss me, because if they did, they wouldn't have treated me this way all these years. I thought about replying, but then decided not to. After all, forgiveness isn't something to rush. It's a process that takes time and reflection. Even so, I'm not sure I want to have a relationship with her again. I might be able to forgive her, but that doesn't mean we'll ever really be sisters. To be honest, after getting married, I no longer feel alone. I've learned that I have my loving husband by my side, supportive friends, and the unwavering love of my grandparents. With their support, I know I can face any challenge that comes my way without needing Vicky or my parents in my life. I've even found a great therapist and scheduled my first appointment to help me address and heal the wounds of my past. Update 4. I think I did the right thing by not replying to that email I mentioned in the last update, because now everything is coming to light. It turns out that Vicky didn't write anything at all. The email was sent by my parents using her account. That explains all the talk about forgiving my parents, because they were the ones who wrote it. I found out when I ran into Vicky one day. When I greeted her, she looked at me with her usual disdain. I brought up the email, thinking that my lack of response might be the issue, and she told me she hadn't sent anything. She pulled out her phone, found the email in her sent folder, but swore she hadn't written a single word. At that moment, we both realized who the true author was, since some computer at home must have still been logged into Vicky's account. I also asked her about that housewarming party, and she said it never happened. So, as I suspected, it was all a lie by my parents. After that, we went our separate ways, and that was that. Honestly, I don't know who's worse in my life, my sister or my parents, because by now, my parents' behavior has gotten too twisted. At least now everyone's going to know, since I made a post on Instagram with links to my Reddit thread, and all my family and close friends are reading this story.